Hello, and welcome. It's good to have you here, wherever you are, as the day winds down or the night deepens around you. Tonight, we're going to spend some time together exploring one of the ocean's quietest miracles, the way a starfish can lose an arm and grow it back, and how that small act of renewal connects to something much larger, something that flows through coral reefs and kelp forests and the deep places where life fades into blue silence. These are not urgent facts. They are gentle ones, the kind that settle softly into the mind. You can let your shoulders settle if they haven't already. There's no need to hold anything tightly here. I know you might be tired. Perhaps the day has asked a lot of you, or perhaps you're simply ready to let your thoughts drift somewhere calm and far away. That's exactly where we're going. You don't need to remember everything. You don't need to hold on. Just let the words move through you like a tide, slow and steady, carrying you toward rest. If these journeys bring you comfort, you're welcome to return anytime. There are always more stories waiting, more quiet corners of the world to explore together. So let's begin with something small and soft-bodied, something that moves across the ocean floor in slow motion, something that has been doing the same patient work for hundreds of millions of years. Let's begin with the starfish and the strange, beautiful way it refuses to be broken. The starfish is not a fish. This is one of those quiet corrections that science offers us, a small adjustment to the way we see the world. It belongs to a group called echinoderms, a word that means spiny skin, and it shares this category with sea urchins, sand dollars, and sea cucumbers. These creatures are ancient. They were already old when the first forests grew on land. They have no brain, no blood, and no centralized heart. And yet they move, they sense, they heal, and they endure. A starfish has what we might call a radial body plan. That means its body spreads outward from a central point, like the spokes of a wheel or the petals of a flower. Most starfish have 5 arms, though some have more, 7, 10, even 40. There are species with 50 arms, thin and delicate, waving in the current like the branches of an underwater tree. This symmetry is different from ours. We are bilateral, built along a single axis, left and right mirroring each other. But the starfish is built around a center, and this gives it a kind of flexibility, a way of being in the world that doesn't depend on a single direction or a single front. And this radial design is part of what makes regeneration possible. If a starfish loses an arm, to a predator, to a storm, to the rough scrape of rocks, it can grow that arm back. This is not a quick process. It is slow, patient, cellular. The wound closes first, sealing itself against infection, against the intrusion of the world. Then, over weeks or months, the tissues begin to rebuild. Tube feet emerge, small and translucent. The skeletal plates, made of calcium carbonate, form beneath the skin. Muscles knit together, nerves extend, reaching outward, reconnecting the new arm to the rest of the body. The starfish does not panic. It does not rush. It simply continues, one cell at a time, one day at a time, until the arm is whole again. Some species can do more than this. Some can regenerate an entire body from a single arm, as long as part of the central disc is still attached. Imagine that. Imagine being broken down to a fragment, a piece of yourself, and slowly, steadily, rebuilding everything you were. It takes time, sometimes a year or more, but it happens. The arm sprouts new arms. The disc reforms. The mouth, the stomach, the water vascular system, all of it grows back, guided by genetic instructions that have been carried forward through deep time. This is not magic. It is biology, but it feels, in its quiet way, like hope. The process begins at the cellular level, in places we cannot see without magnification. When a starfish is injured, certain cells near the wound site begin to dedifferentialize. That means they lose their specialized function and become more flexible, more capable of becoming something else. These cells can then be guided to become skin cells, muscle cells, nerve cells, whatever is needed. It's a kind of cellular memory, a way of reaching back into the instructions written in DNA and pulling out the blueprints for something lost. In some ways, this is similar to what happens in human bodies when we heal a cut or mend a broken bone. But the starfish takes it further. It doesn't just close the wound. It rebuilds the architecture. It restores function. It makes itself whole again, not as a scar, but as a living, moving limb. And it does this without a brain to coordinate the process. The starfish has no central command center. Instead, it relies on a distributed nervous system, a network of nerves that runs through each arm and connects at a nerve ring around the mouth. Each arm has a degree of independence. Each one can sense light, detect chemicals in the water, and respond to touch. When one arm is lost, the others continue. When a new arm grows, it joins the network, integrating itself into the whole. This is a body that knows how to be incomplete and still function. It knows how to lose part of itself and continue. And in time, it knows how to become whole again. There's something deeply calming about this. In a world that often feels fragile, where damage seems permanent and loss feels final, the starfish offers a different story. It says that brokenness is not the end. It says that time and patience and the quiet work of cells can restore what was taken. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen with force or speed. It happens slowly, in the dark, in the cold water, one small change at a time. And this process is not unique to starfish. It echoes through the ocean in countless forms. Coral reefs, for instance, are also capable of regeneration. When a piece of coral is broken off by a wave or a careless anchor, it doesn't simply die. If conditions are right, it can reattach to the substrate and continue growing. Coral polyps, the tiny animals that build the reef, can reproduce asexually, budding off new polyps that clone themselves and expand the colony. A single coral head can live for hundreds of years, growing slowly, layer by layer, building the calcium carbonate skeleton that becomes the foundation for entire ecosystems. When a coral is damaged, it can heal. The tissue at the edge of the wound begins to grow inward, covering the exposed skeleton. It's a slow process, vulnerable to infection and algae, but it happens. The coral doesn't give up. It continues to build, to grow, to reach toward the light. And coral reefs are not isolated structures. They are communities. Fish, mollusks, crustaceans, sponges, algae, all of them depend on the reef, and the reef depends on them. When the reef regenerates, it regenerates habitat. It regenerates shelter, food, breeding grounds. It regenerates the possibility of life. This interconnectedness is one of the ocean's defining features. Nothing exists in isolation. Every act of healing, every slow regrowth, every patient reconstruction ripples outward, touching other lives, other systems, other futures. Kelp forests are another example. These towering underwater groves, some reaching over 100 feet tall, are made of algae, not plants, though they look like trees swaying in the current. Kelp grows fast. Some species can grow 2 feet in a single day, which is one of the fastest growth rates of any organism on Earth. This rapid growth allows kelp forests to recover quickly from disturbances. If a storm tears through and rips away the canopy, the holdfasts, the root-like structures that anchor the kelp to the ocean floor, often survive. And from those holdfasts, new fronds begin to grow, reaching upward toward the light, rebuilding the forest. Kelp forests provide habitat for thousands of species. Fish hide in the fronds. Sea otters wrap themselves in the kelp to keep from drifting while they sleep. Invertebrates cling to the stipes, the stem-like structures that support the blades. When the kelp regenerates, all of this comes back. The forest returns, and with it, the life it shelters. But regeneration in the ocean is not always fast. Some processes take decades, even centuries. Deep-sea corals, for instance, grow at a pace almost too slow to measure. They live in the cold, dark depths where food is scarce and growth is incremental. A deep-sea coral colony might add only a few millimeters to its structure each year. If it is damaged by trawling nets, by deep-sea mining, by the slow creep of ocean acidification, it may take hundreds of years to recover, if it recovers at all. This reminds us that not all wounds heal at the same speed. Some take longer. Some require conditions that are difficult to meet. And some, if the damage is too great, may not heal at all. But even in these slow, vulnerable systems, there is a capacity for endurance. There is a quiet persistence. The deep-sea coral continues to grow, one polyp at a time, 1 year at a time, building something that will outlast storms, outlast seasons, outlast the lives of the creatures that depend on it. And then there are the seagrasses, which grow in shallow coastal waters, their roots anchoring them in sand and mud. Seagrass meadows are among the most productive ecosystems on the planet. They absorb carbon dioxide, produce oxygen, filter pollutants, and provide nursery habitat for fish and invertebrates. When a seagrass meadow is damaged by boat propellers, by dredging, by storms, it can regenerate, but it needs time. The rhizomes, the underground stems that connect the plants, can send up new shoots. Seeds can germinate and take root. Slowly, the meadow returns. But seagrasses are sensitive. They need clear water and sunlight. If the water becomes too murky, if sediment clouds the light, the seagrass cannot photosynthesize, and it begins to die. Regeneration depends on the right conditions. It depends on the health of the surrounding environment. It depends on the absence of ongoing harm. This is true for all regeneration. It is not just about the organism's ability to heal. It is also about the world allowing it to heal. The ocean itself has a kind of regenerative capacity. Water cycles through it, evaporating into the atmosphere, falling as rain, flowing back through rivers and streams. Nutrients cycle through it, carried by currents, consumed by plankton, passed up the food chain, and return to the depths when organisms die and decompose. Energy cycles through it, entering as sunlight, captured by photosynthetic algae and bacteria, transferred through predation and grazing, and eventually dissipating as heat. These cycles are ancient. They have been running for billions of years, long before there were starfish or coral or kelp. They are the foundation of life in the ocean, and they continue, day after day, night after night, in a rhythm that is both steady and dynamic. The tides are part of this rhythm. Twice a day, in most places, the ocean rises and falls, pulled by the gravity of the moon and, to a lesser extent, the sun. This movement of water shapes coastlines, fills estuaries, exposes tide pools, and then covers them again. Organisms that live in the intertidal zone, the area between high and low tide, must be able to survive both underwater and in the air. They must endure desiccation, temperature swings, and the constant movement of water. And they do. Barnacles close their shells. Mussels clamp down. Anemones retract their tentacles and wait. And when the tide returns, they open again. They extend. They feed. They continue. This daily cycle of exposure and immersion is a kind of rhythm, a pulse that runs through the coastal ocean. It is predictable, but it is not static. Spring tides, when the sun and moon align, bring higher highs and lower lows. Neap tides, when they are at right angles, bring smaller changes. Storms can push water higher. Atmospheric pressure can hold it lower. The rhythm is constant, but it is also flexible, responsive to forces both celestial and terrestrial. And within this rhythm, life regenerates. Algae grow back on rocks, scraped clean by waves. Limpets return to their home scars. The The small depressions, they grind into the rock where they fit perfectly. Sea stars move slowly across the tide pools, their tube feet gripping and releasing, an emotion that is both alien and strangely familiar. The tube feet are one of the starfish's most remarkable features. They are part of the water vascular system, a network of fluid-filled canals that runs through the body. Seawater enters through a sieve-like plate on the top of the starfish, called the madrepori, and flows through the canals to the tube feet. Each tube foot is a small, flexible tube with a sucker at the end. By controlling the pressure of the fluid inside, the starfish can extend or retract the tube feet, creating suction or releasing it. This system allows the starfish to move, to cling to surfaces, and to pry open the shells of prey. It is slow, but it is powerful. A starfish can exert enough force to pull apart the two halves of a clamshell, creating a gap just wide enough to insert its stomach. Yes, its stomach. The starfish has an unusual way of eating. It everts its stomach, turns it inside out, and pushes it through its mouth, which is located on the underside of the central disc. The stomach then slips into the gap between the clamshell and begins to digest the soft tissue inside. The starfish doesn't need to swallow its prey whole. It digests it externally, absorbing the nutrients through the stomach lining, and then pulls the stomach back inside. This is a slow process. A starfish might spend hours feeding on a single clam, but is effective, and it allows the starfish to consume prey that is larger than its mouth, prey that would be impossible to eat any other way. And if the starfish loses an arm while feeding, while moving, while simply existing in the rough and variable world of the ocean, it will regenerate. It will close the wound, rebuild the tissues, and continue. It will not be diminished. It will not be less. It will be whole again in time. There are over 2,000 species of starfish, and they live in every ocean, from the warm shallows of tropical reefs to the cold, dark floors of the deep sea. They come in a stunning variety of shapes and colors. Some are bright orange or red, their color a warning to predators that they are toxic or distasteful. Some are mottled brown or gray, blending into the rocks and sand. Some are smooth, and some are covered in spines or bumps. Some are small enough to fit on a fingertip, and some have an arm span of over 3 feet. Each species has adapted to its environment, to the specific challenges and opportunities of the place it calls home. And each one carries the same basic ability to regenerate, though the speed and extent of that regeneration can vary. The crown of thorn starfish, for instance, is a large, spiny species that feeds on coral. It can be a destructive force on reefs, especially when its population explodes in response to nutrient pollution or the removal of its predators. But even this species, often seen as a villain in the story of coral reefs, is capable of regeneration. If it is injured, it heals. If it loses an arm, it grows it back. It is simply doing what starfish do, surviving, adapting, persisting. And this brings us to a larger question, one that sits quietly beneath all of these facts. What does it mean to regenerate? What does it mean to be broken and then become whole again? In biology, regeneration is defined as the process by which organisms replace or restore lost or damaged cells, tissues, organs, or even entire body parts. It is a form of healing, but it goes beyond simple wound closure. It involves the reconstruction of complex structures, the restoration of function, the return to a state that resembles what was there before. But regeneration is not just a biological process. It is also a metaphor, a way of thinking about resilience, recovery, and the possibility of renewal. It reminds us that damage is not always permanent, that loss is not always final, that given time, given the right conditions, given patience, things can grow back. This is not to say that regeneration erases what happened. The starfish that grows a new arm is not the same as it was before. The new arm is slightly different, slightly younger, a visible mark of what was lost and what was regained. The coral that heals from a break carries the history of that break in its structure. The kelp forest that regrows after a storm is not identical to the one that was torn away. It is new growth, new life, shaped by the same forces but not the same in every detail. Regeneration is not about returning to an idealized past. It is about continuing. It is about adapting. It is about building something new from what remains. And in the ocean, this happens constantly. Every day, in every corner of the sea, organisms are healing, regrowing, rebuilding. Most of it happens slowly, quietly, out of sight, but it is happening. The ocean is always in the process of regenerating itself, always knitting together the small wounds and the large ones, always reaching toward wholeness. This is one of the reasons the ocean feels so calming, so timeless. It is not static, it is not unchanging, but it has a rhythm, a continuity, a sense of deep time that puts our own lives into perspective. The ocean has been here for billions of years. It has weathered ice ages and warm periods, asteroid impacts and volcanic eruptions, the rise and fall of countless species. And it continues. It regenerates. It endures. And within that vastness, the starfish moves slowly across the ocean floor, its tube feet gripping and releasing. Its body is small, radial miracle of persistence. It does not hurry. It does not worry. It simply is, and in being, it offers us a kind of quiet lesson. You don't have to be whole all the time. You don't have to be perfect. You can lose pieces of yourself and still continue. And in time, with patience, those pieces can grow back. Not because you forced them to, not because you rushed, but because that is what living things do. They heal, they regenerate, they endure. And as you lie here, breathing slowly, letting the day fall away, you can hold that thought gently. You can let it settle into the quiet spaces of your mind. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to be incomplete. You are allowed to take the time you need to heal, to grow, to become whole again in your own way, at your own pace. The ocean is not in a hurry. The starfish is not in a hurry, and neither are you. The regeneration process begins with something quiet. When a starfish loses an arm, its body does not panic. There is no alarm system, no rush of emergency signals flooding through tissues. Instead, the wound site begins to seal itself with deliberate slowness, a process measured not in minutes, but in hours and days. Cells migrate toward the injury, forming a protective layer that shields the exposed interior from infection and predators. This is the first stage of healing, and it happens with the same steady rhythm as waves returning to shore again and again, without hurry. The cells that gather at the wound site are not specialized at first. They arrive as general workers, multipurpose and adaptable. But as they settle into position, something remarkable begins. They start to communicate with one another through chemical signals, tiny molecular messages that pass from cell to cell like whispers in a dark room. These signals tell the cells what they need to become. Some will form new skin. Others will develop into tube feet, those delicate hydraulic structures that allow starfish to move and grip surfaces. Still others will become nerves, muscle, or the internal structures that support the growing limb. This transformation is called dedifferentiation, and it represents one of the most profound abilities in the animal kingdom. Cells that had already committed to a specific role in the body reverse their development, becoming more primitive, more flexible. They step backward in time, returning to a state where they can choose a new path forward. It is as if a musician could forget their instrument and learn another from the beginning, or a tree could pull its branches back into the trunk and extend them in a new direction. The starfish does this quietly, without fanfare, in the cold darkness of the ocean floor. The speed of regeneration varies widely among species. Some starfish can regrow a lost arm in a matter of weeks. Others take months or even a full year, depending on water temperature, food availability, and the overall health of the animal. Cold water slows the process, while warmer temperatures can accelerate it, though only to a point. If the water becomes too warm, the starfish's metabolism struggles, and regeneration may stall entirely. There is a narrow band of conditions where healing happens most efficiently, and the starfish must live within that band, patient and persistent. During regeneration, the starfish often reduces its activity. It moves less, feeds less, conserves energy. The body redirects resources toward the wound, prioritizing repair over exploration or reproduction. This is a kind of rest, a biological decision to turn inward and focus on restoration. The starfish may settle into a crevice or beneath a rock, where it is less visible to predators and where the water moves gently, carrying oxygen and nutrients without disturbing the healing process. It waits there quietly while its body works. The new arm that grows is not a perfect copy of the old one. At first, it is smaller, paler, softer. It lacks the full strength and coordination of the mature limbs. But over time, it catches up. The cells continue to divide and differentiate. The tissues thicken and harden, and eventually the new arm becomes indistinguishable from the others. The starfish returns to its full form, whole again, though it carries the memory of its injury and the brief history written into its cells. Some starfish can regenerate even more than a single arm. If the body is split in half, and each half retains a portion of the central disc, both halves may survive and regrow into complete individuals. This is not common, and it requires specific conditions, but it happens. Two starfish emerge from one, each carrying forward the genetic blueprint of the original. It is a form of asexual reproduction, accidental or intentional, depending on the circumstances. The ocean floor becomes a place where one life can become two, where loss transforms into multiplication. The central disc is the key. It contains the vital organs, the stomach, the reproductive structures, the nerve ring that coordinates movement. Without a piece of the central disc, a severed arm cannot regenerate a new body. It will eventually die, though it may continue to move for a short time, its tube feet still responding to residual nerve signals. But with even a small fragment of the disc, regeneration becomes possible. The body rebuilds itself from that fragment, slowly, methodically, until it is whole again. This ability to regenerate is not unique to starfish, but they are among the most accomplished practitioners. Other echinoderms share the skill to varying degrees. Sea cucumbers can expel their internal organs when threatened and then regrow them over the following weeks. Brittle stars, close relatives of starfish, can shed arms with even greater ease, snapping them off at predetermined breaking points when grabbed by predators. The severed arm wriggles and distracts the attacker while the brittle star escapes, already beginning the process of regrowth. These are strategies refined over hundreds of millions of years, tested and proven in the vast laboratory of the ocean. The regeneration process is controlled by genes, specific sequences of DNA that activate in response to injury. These genes are ancient, shared across many branches of the animal kingdom, though they are expressed most dramatically in creatures like starfish. Scientists study these genes carefully, hoping to understand the molecular switches that turn regeneration on and off. In humans, these same genes exist, but they are largely silent. Our bodies can heal wounds, knit broken bones, regenerate liver tissue to some extent, but we cannot regrow limbs. The starfish holds secrets that we are only beginning to decode, patterns written into its genome that might one day inform medicine, tissue engineering, and our understanding of healing itself. The starfish's regenerative ability also depends on its simple body structure. It has no centralized brain, no single point of control that must be preserved. Instead, It has a nerve ring encircling its mouth, with radial nerves extending into each arm. This decentralized nervous system means that losing an arm does not cripple the animal's ability to sense and respond to its environment. The remaining arms continue to function, coordinating with one another through the nerve ring, and the starfish adapts to its temporary asymmetry. When a new arm grows, it integrates seamlessly into the existing network, and balance is restored. The hydraulic system that powers the starfish's movement is equally resilient. Water enters the body through a structure called the madreporite, a small sieve-like plate on the upper surface. From there, it flows into a network of canals that extend throughout the body and into each arm. The water pressure in these canals controls the extension and retraction of the tube feet, allowing the starfish to walk, climb, and grip. When an arm is lost, the canals seal themselves off, preventing water loss. As the arm regenerates, new canals grow, connecting to the central system, and the tube feet begin to function. The starfish tests the new arm, extending and retracting the tube feet, learning to coordinate them with the others. It is a gradual process, a kind of physical therapy built into the animal's biology. Starfish live in environments where injury is common. They inhabit rocky shores battered by waves, coral reefs crowded with competitors and predators, and deep sea floors where food is scarce and every encounter carries risk. Their ability to regenerate is not a rare emergency response, but a regular part of their life cycle. Many starfish bear the marks of past injuries, arms slightly shorter or paler than the others, evidence of survival and recovery. They are living records of resilience, each one a testament to the body's capacity to rebuild. The ocean itself is a place of constant regeneration. Coral reefs, often called the rainforests of the sea, are built by tiny polyps that secrete calcium carbonate skeletons. When a coral polyp is damaged, it can regenerate, regrowing tissue over the skeleton and resuming its role in the reef. The process is slow, vulnerable to disruption by pollution, warming water, and physical damage, but it happens. Entire sections of reef can recover from bleaching events if conditions improve, the polyps returning to health. Their symbiotic algae repopulating the tissues, color and life returning to what had seemed dead. Kelp forests, those towering underwater groves, also regenerate. Kelp is a type of large brown algae that can grow astonishingly fast, sometimes more than half a meter per day in ideal conditions. When a kelp frond is torn away by a storm, the holdfast that anchors it to the rock often survives. From that holdfast, new fronds can emerge, reaching toward the surface, unfurling in the current. The forest rebuilds itself, providing habitat for fish, invertebrates, and marine mammals. The kelp's rapid growth is a form of regeneration, a constant renewal that sustains entire ecosystems. Seagrass meadows, found in shallow coastal waters, regenerate through both vegetative growth and sexual reproduction. When a section of seagrass is uprooted by a storm or damaged by boat anchors, the surrounding plants can send out runners, horizontal stems called rhizomes, that spread across the seafloor and sprout new shoots. The meadow heals itself, filling in the gaps, restoring the dense network of blades that stabilize sediment, filter water, and provide nursery habitat for countless species. This process can take years, but it is persistent, driven by the same quiet determination that characterizes the starfish's regrowth. Mangrove forests, which grow at the boundary between land and sea, also demonstrate remarkable regenerative capacity. When a mangrove tree is damaged by a hurricane, it can sprout new branches from the trunk, or new seedlings can establish themselves in the disturbed soil. The roots of mangroves, which extend into the water and trap sediment, create a stable foundation that resists erosion. Even when individual trees are lost, the forest as a whole can recover, given time and the absence of further disturbance. The mangroves rebuild their protective barrier, sheltering coastlines and providing habitat for fish, birds, and crustaceans. The ocean's capacity for regeneration extends to its largest inhabitants as well. Whales, when injured, can heal wounds that would be fatal to most land animals. The blubber layer beneath their skin is rich in blood vessels, which deliver oxygen and nutrients to damaged tissue. Scars on whales tell stories of encounters with ships, fishing gear, and predators. But the whales survive, their bodies closing wounds, fighting off infection, and continuing their migrations across thousands of kilometers. They carry their histories with them, written in scar tissue, but they endure. Even the smallest creatures participate in this cycle of renewal. Plankton, the microscopic organisms that drift in the ocean's currents, reproduce rapidly, their populations rebounding from losses within days or weeks. When a bloom of phytoplankton is consumed by zooplankton, or when a storm mixes the water column and disrupts their concentration, the survivors multiply and the bloom returns. This rapid regeneration forms the foundation of the ocean's food web, supporting everything from tiny fish larvae to the largest whales. The starfish, moving slowly across the reef or the rocky shore, is part of this larger pattern. Its regeneration is not an isolated miracle, but one expression of a fundamental principle that runs through all of ocean life. The capacity to heal, to rebuild, to continue despite injury and loss, is woven into the fabric of marine ecosystems. It is a quiet strength, rarely dramatic, but always present. The chemical signals that guide regeneration in starfish are complex and still not fully understood. Scientists have identified several key molecules, including proteins that promote cell division and others that guide the differentiation of cells into specific tissue types. These molecules are released in precise sequences, each one triggering the next step in the regeneration process. The timing is critical. If the signals arrive too early or too late, the regeneration may fail, producing a malformed limb or no limb at all. But in most cases, the system works. The signals arrive on schedule, the cells respond, and the arm grows. One of the proteins involved in starfish regeneration is similar to those found in other regenerating animals, such as salamanders and certain fish. This suggests that the ability to regenerate limbs may have evolved early in animal history, before the lineages that led to starfish and vertebrates diverged. Over time, most vertebrates lost this ability, retaining only limited regenerative capacity. But the starfish kept it, refining it, making it central to their survival strategy. They are living links to an ancient past, when healing was more common, more complete. The environment in which a starfish lives also influences its regenerative ability. Starfish in nutrient-rich waters, where food is abundant, regenerate faster than those in nutrient-poor environments. The energy required to rebuild an arm is substantial, and it must come from somewhere. If the starfish cannot find enough food, regeneration slows or stops. The body prioritizes basic survival functions, and the wound site remains in a holding pattern, waiting for conditions to improve. When food becomes available again, regeneration resumes, and the arm continues to grow. Temperature plays a similarly important role. In cold, polar waters, starfish regenerate slowly, their metabolisms running at a reduced pace. The chemical reactions that drive cell division and tissue formation occur more slowly in the cold, and the starfish must wait longer for their arms to regrow. But this slowness has an advantage. Cold water holds more dissolved oxygen than warm water, and the starfish's tissues remain well oxygenated even as they work at a reduced rate. The regeneration may take longer, but it is often more successful, with fewer errors and complications. In tropical waters, where temperatures are higher, regeneration can proceed more quickly, but it also carries greater risks. Warm water holds less oxygen, and the starfish's tissues may struggle to meet the demands of rapid cell division. Infections are more common in warm water, as bacteria multiply faster. The starfish must balance speed against safety, and evolution has tuned their regenerative processes to the specific conditions of their habitats. Each species has adapted to its own thermal range, its own pace of healing. The starfish's diet also affects regeneration. Starfish are carnivores, feeding on mollusks, barnacles, worms, and other invertebrates. They use their tube feet to pry open the shells of clams and mussels, then extend their stomachs out through their mouths and into the shells, digesting the soft tissue inside. This method of feeding provides the proteins, lipids, and minerals needed for growth and repair. A starfish that is well fed can regenerate an arm more quickly than one that is starving. The nutrients are broken down and transported through the body, delivered to the wound site, and incorporated into new cells. Some starfish are specialists, feeding on specific prey. The crown-of-thorns starfish, for example, feeds almost exclusively on coral polyps. It moves across the reef, extending its stomach over the coral and digesting the living tissue, leaving behind bare white skeleton. This starfish is highly effective at what it does, and it can regenerate lost arms quickly, allowing it to continue feeding even after injury. Its regenerative ability contributes to its success as a predator, and in some regions, populations of crown-of-thorns starfish have grown so large that they threaten the health of coral reefs. The balance between predator and prey, between regeneration and destruction, is delicate. Other starfish are generalists, feeding on whatever is available. The common starfish, found along many temperate coastlines, will eat mussels, clams, snails, and even dead fish. Its flexibility in diet allows it to survive in a wide range of habitats, and its regenerative ability ensures that it can recover from the many hazards it encounters. It is a survivor, adaptable and resilient, shaped by millions of years of evolution to thrive in the ever-changing ocean. The starfish's reproductive strategy also connects to its regenerative abilities. Most starfish reproduce sexually, releasing eggs and sperm into the water, where fertilization occurs. The fertilized eggs develop into free-swimming larvae that drift in the plankton for weeks or months before settling to the seafloor and metamorphosing into juvenile starfish. But some species can also reproduce asexually through a process called fissiparity. The starfish splits itself in half, and each half regenerates into a complete individual. This method of reproduction is less common, but it allows starfish to colonize new areas quickly, especially in environments where mates are scarce. The larvae of starfish are delicate, transparent, and bilaterally symmetrical, looking nothing like the radial adults they will become. They drift in the ocean currents, feeding on microscopic algae, growing slowly. When they are ready to settle, they search for suitable substrate, often guided by chemical cues released by adult starfish or by the organisms they will eventually feed on. Once they find a good spot, they attach and undergo metamorphosis, a dramatic transformation in which their bilateral body plan is reorganized into the radial form of the adult. This transformation is another kind of regeneration, a rebuilding of the entire body according to a new blueprint. The settled juvenile starfish is tiny, often less than a millimeter across. It begins to grow, adding new tissue, extending its arms, developing its tube feet and internal organs. Growth is slow and steady, and the young starfish is vulnerable to predation, desiccation, and starvation. Many do not survive, but those that do eventually reach maturity, joining the adult population on the reef or shore. They carry forward the genetic legacy of their parents, and they bring with them the same regenerative abilities, the same capacity to heal and rebuild. The starfish's skeleton is made of calcium carbonate plates called ossicles, embedded in the body wall. These ossicles are not fused into a rigid shell like those of a clam or a crab. Instead, they are connected by soft tissue and muscles, giving the starfish flexibility. When an arm regenerates, new ossicles form, growing from the wound site outward. They start small and soft, then harden as calcium carbonate is deposited. The process is gradual, and the new arm remains somewhat flexible until the ossicles are fully formed. This flexibility allows the starfish to move and feed, even while regeneration is underway. The colors of starfish are produced by pigments in the skin, and these pigments are often linked to the starfish's diet. Carotenoids, the same pigments that make carrots orange, are obtained from the starfish's prey and deposited in the skin. A starfish that feeds on carotenoid-rich organisms will be brighter and more colorful than one that does not. When an arm regenerates, the new tissue may be paler at first, lacking the full concentration of pigments. But as the starfish continues to feed, the pigments accumulate and the color deepens until the new arm matches the old ones. Some starfish are bioluminescent, producing light through chemical reactions in their tissues. This light is usually faint, a soft glow that may serve to startle predators or communicate with other starfish. The bioluminescent organs are distributed throughout the body, and when an arm is lost, the regenerating tissue must rebuild these organs as well. The light returns gradually, faint at first, then brightening as the cells mature and the chemical pathways are established. It is another layer of complexity in the regeneration process, another system that must be restored. The starfish's immune system, though simple compared to that of vertebrates, plays a crucial role in regeneration. When an arm is severed, the wound is immediately vulnerable to infection by bacteria, fungi, and other microorganisms. The starfish's immune cells, called coelomocytes, patrol the body cavity and tissues, engulfing foreign particles and releasing antimicrobial compounds. These cells rush to the wound site, forming a defensive barrier that protects the regenerating tissue. Without this immune response, regeneration would often fail, the wound site overwhelmed by infection before healing could begin. The ocean water itself can be both a help and a hindrance to regeneration. Seawater is full of microorganisms, some beneficial, some harmful. The starfish's skin is covered with a mucus layer that helps protect against infection, and this mucus contains antimicrobial peptides that kill or inhibit bacteria. When an arm is lost, the mucus production increases at the wound site, providing additional protection. The starfish also benefits from the constant flow of water, which carries away dead cells and debris, keeping the wound clean. But if the water is polluted or stagnant, the risk of infection rises, and regeneration becomes more difficult. Pollution is one of the greatest threats to the ocean's regenerative capacity. Heavy metals, plastics, agricultural runoff, and industrial chemicals all interfere with the biological processes that drive healing and growth. Starfish exposed to high levels of pollutants may struggle to regenerate, their cells damaged, their immune systems weakened. The same is true for corals, kelp, seagrasses, and all the other organisms that depend on clean water to thrive. The ocean's ability to heal itself is remarkable, but it is not limitless. It requires conditions that allow the natural processes of regeneration to unfold. Climate change adds another layer of stress. As ocean temperatures rise, many species are pushed beyond their thermal tolerance. Starfish that evolved in cold or temperate waters may find it harder to regenerate in warmer conditions. Coral reefs, already stressed by warming and acidification, struggle to recover from bleaching events. Kelp forests retreat toward cooler waters, and seagrass meadows decline. The ocean's regenerative systems are being tested in ways they have not been for thousands of years, and the outcome is uncertain. But even in the face of these challenges, regeneration continues. Starfish still regrow their arms, Corals still repair damaged tissue. Kelp forests still send up new fronds. The processes are slower, less reliable, more vulnerable to disruption, but they persist. The ocean is not helpless. It is resilient, adaptive, capable of recovery if given the chance. The starfish, moving across the reef with its regenerating arm, is a symbol of that resilience, a reminder that life finds ways to continue. The study of regeneration has fascinated scientists for centuries. Early naturalists observed starfish regrowing lost arms and wondered how such a feat was possible. They conducted experiments, cutting starfish into pieces, observing which pieces survived and which did not. They learned that the central disc was essential, that regeneration required certain conditions, that the process was governed by rules they were only beginning to understand. These early studies laid the foundation for modern regenerative biology, a field that now explores the molecular and genetic mechanisms underlying healing and regrowth. Today, researchers use advanced techniques to study starfish regeneration. They sequence the starfish genome, identifying the genes that are activated during regeneration. They use microscopy to watch cells migrate and differentiate in real time. They manipulate gene expression, turning specific genes on or off to see how regeneration is affected. These studies reveal the intricate choreography of regeneration, the precise timing and coordination required to rebuild a complex structure like a starfish arm. They also reveal how much we still have to learn. The knowledge gained from studying starfish regeneration has implications far beyond marine biology. Understanding how starfish regrow limbs could inform efforts to promote tissue regeneration in humans. Scientists are exploring ways to activate dormant regenerative pathways in human cells, hoping to develop therapies for spinal cord injuries, heart damage, and limb loss. The starfish, with its ancient and efficient regenerative machinery, offers clues that might one day transform medicine. It is a quiet teacher, living its life on the ocean floor, holding secrets that could change our own. The starfish does not know it is being studied. It does not know that its regenerative abilities are remarkable. It simply lives, moving slowly across the rocks, feeding, reproducing, and when necessary, regrowing what has been lost. It is a creature of instinct and biology, shaped by evolution to survive in a challenging environment. But in its survival, in its quiet persistence, it embodies principles that resonate far beyond the ocean. It shows us that healing is possible, that time and patience can restore what seems broken, that life has an inherent capacity to renew itself. The regenerative processes we've traced so far exist within a larger rhythm, a planetary pulse that moves through every ocean basin and coastal zone. The starfish regrowing its arm is not separate from the tides that wash over it twice each day, nor from the currents that carry nutrients across thousands of miles, nor from the microscopic plankton that form the foundation of nearly every marine food web. These systems interweave in ways that become more apparent the longer we observe them. And tonight we can follow those connections outward, tracing how regeneration occurs not just in individual organisms, but in the great circulating systems of the ocean itself. The ocean moves in layers, and each layer carries its own community of life. Near the surface, where sunlight penetrates most strongly, phytoplankton drift in concentrations that shift with seasons and currents. These single-celled organisms, mostly diatoms and dinoflagellates, perform photosynthesis just as land plants do, converting dissolved carbon dioxide and sunlight into organic matter. They reproduce rapidly, some species doubling their population in less than a day when conditions favor growth. This constant regeneration of microscopic life produces roughly half of the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere, a fact that quietly underscores how much we depend on processes we rarely see. When a bloom of phytoplankton fades, the cells sink slowly through the water column, carrying carbon and nutrients downward, feeding communities in the depths, and eventually settling on the seafloor, where they become part of sediments that may persist for millions of years. Zooplankton graze on these drifting gardens, and they too regenerate with remarkable speed. Copepods, tiny crustaceans no larger than a grain of rice, dominate the zooplankton community in most oceans. A female copepod can produce dozens of eggs in a single reproductive event, and those eggs hatch into larvae that pass through multiple developmental stages, each one slightly more complex than the last. The entire life cycle from egg to adult may complete in just a few weeks, meaning that populations can recover quickly after disturbances. This rapid regeneration allows copepods to track the patchy, shifting blooms of phytoplankton, concentrating where food is abundant and reproducing before the bloom dissipates. Jellyfish demonstrate another form of regeneration that operates on a longer time scale. Many jellyfish species alternate between two body forms during their life cycle. The medusa, the familiar bell-shaped form that drifts through open water, reproduces sexually, releasing eggs and sperm into the surrounding sea. The fertilized eggs develop into tiny larvae that settle on hard surfaces and transform into polyps, small anemone-like creatures that attach to rocks or shells. These polyps can live for years, feeding on passing plankton and occasionally budding off new polyps to form small colonies. When conditions become favorable, a polyp undergoes a transformation called strobilation, segmenting its body into a stack of disc-shaped structures that eventually break free and swim away as juvenile medusae. This process allows a single polyp to produce many jellyfish, effectively regenerating the population even if adult medusae are scarce. Some jellyfish species have taken regeneration to an extreme that seems almost impossible. Turritopsis dohrnii, a small jellyfish found in warm seas around the world, can reverse its life cycle when stressed or injured. Instead of dying after reproducing, the medusa can sink to the seafloor and transform back into a polyp, essentially resetting its developmental clock. This process, called transdifferentiation, involves cells changing from one specialized type to another, a feat that most animals cannot perform once they reach adulthood. The polyp can then produce new medusae, potentially repeating the cycle indefinitely. While individual jellyfish still face predation, disease, and other hazards, the theoretical potential for biological immortality through regeneration makes this species a subject of intense scientific interest. Sea cucumbers, relatives of starfish that live on the ocean floor, possess regenerative abilities that extend to their internal organs. When threatened by predators, some sea cucumber species expel their digestive tract, respiratory structures, and other internal tissues through either their mouth or anus, a defensive behavior called evisceration. The predator often becomes distracted by this offering, allowing the sea cucumber to escape. Over the following weeks and months, the sea cucumber regenerates all of its lost organs, rebuilding complex structures from the remaining body wall tissues. This process requires careful coordination of cell division, migration, and differentiation, all occurring inside a body cavity that must continue to function even while missing major components. The regenerated organs are fully functional, allowing the sea cucumber to resume normal feeding and respiration. The regeneration of internal organs in sea cucumbers involves many of the same molecular pathways we see in starfish limb regeneration. Certain genes activate within hours of evisceration, triggering an inflammatory response that clears away damaged tissue and initiates wound healing. Stem cells, or dedifferentiated cells, then begin to proliferate, forming a mass of undifferentiated tissue called a blastema. This structure gradually organizes itself, with different cell populations receiving signals that direct them to form digestive epithelium, muscle layers, nerve networks, and connective tissues. The process is slow but remarkably precise, resulting in organs that are anatomically and functionally equivalent to the originals. Sponges represent perhaps the most extreme example of regenerative capacity in the ocean. These simple animals, which lack organs, nervous systems, and most of the features we associate with animal life, can regenerate from remarkably small fragments. If you force a sponge through a fine mesh, breaking it down into individual cells and small cell clusters, those cells can reaggregate and reorganize themselves into a functional sponge within days or weeks. The cells sort themselves by type, with similar cells clustering together, and gradually rebuild the characteristic structure of their species, including the channels and chambers that allow water to flow through the sponge's body. This ability reflects the relatively simple organization of sponge tissues, but it also demonstrates how powerful the inherent self-organizing properties of cells can be when given the right conditions. The ocean floor itself undergoes regeneration after disturbances, though on timescales that extend far beyond individual lifetimes. When a trawling net scrapes across the seafloor, it can remove or damage organisms that have lived there for decades or centuries. The recovery of these communities depends on many factors, including the depth, the type of bottom habitat, and the severity of the disturbance. In shallow areas with soft sediments, mobile species like crabs, worms, and small fish may recolonize within months. The sediment-dwelling bacteria and microscopic organisms that process organic matter often recover even faster, their populations rebounding as soon as the physical disturbance ends. In deeper waters, recovery takes much longer. Cold temperatures slow metabolic rates and growth, meaning that organisms reproduce less frequently and grow more slowly. A deep-sea coral that might take centuries to reach full size cannot quickly replace itself after being destroyed. The regeneration of these communities depends on larvae drifting in from undisturbed areas, a process that can be limited if damage is widespread. Scientists studying trawl scars on the deep sea floor have found that some disturbances remain visible decades after the initial impact, with the community composition still differing from surrounding undisturbed areas. This slow regeneration makes deep-sea ecosystems particularly vulnerable to repeated or extensive disturbance. Hydrothermal vents, those remarkable oases of life in the deep ocean, also undergo cycles of destruction and regeneration. These vents form where seawater seeps down through cracks in the oceanic crust, gets heated by magma or hot rock, and then rises back to the seafloor, carrying dissolved minerals and chemicals. The heated water supports dense communities of bacteria that use chemical energy instead of sunlight to produce organic matter. And these bacteria in turn support a food web that includes giant tube worms, clams, mussels, crabs, and fish. But vents are not permanent. Volcanic activity can shut off the flow of heated water, or new eruptions can bury existing vent fields under fresh lava. When a vent dies, its community dies with it, unable to survive without the chemical energy that sustains them. New vents, however, are colonized remarkably quickly. Within days or weeks of a new vent opening, bacterial mats begin to form on the rocks where hot water emerges. Within months, larger organisms arrive, their larvae having drifted through the deep ocean from other vent sites that might be hundreds of miles away. The first colonists are often small, fast-growing species that can take advantage of the abundant resources, but maybe outcompete later by larger, slower-growing species. Over years and decades, the community matures, reaching a relatively stable composition that persists until the vent eventually fails. This cycle of destruction and regeneration has played out countless times over millions of years, shaping the evolution of vent-adapted species and maintaining genetic connections between distant vent fields. Cold seeps, areas where methane and other hydrocarbons leak from the seafloor, support similar communities through a similar process, though the seeps tend to be more stable over time than hydrothermal vents. The regeneration of seep communities after disturbance follows patterns similar to other deep-sea habitats, with slow growth rates and long recovery times. But the continuous supply of chemical energy means that these sites can support life for thousands of years or longer, allowing complex communities to develop. The open ocean, away from the seafloor, also experiences regeneration through the constant cycling of nutrients and energy. In temperate and polar regions, the ocean undergoes seasonal changes that drive massive blooms of life each spring. During winter, storms mix the water column, bringing nutrients from depth to the surface. As days lengthen and sunlight strengthens in spring, phytoplankton populations explode, turning vast areas of ocean into cloudy green or brown seas visible from space. This bloom supports zooplankton, which in turn support fish, seabirds, and marine mammals. By late summer, the surface nutrients are largely depleted, and productivity declines until the next winter's mixing begins the cycle again. This annual regeneration of productivity has occurred for millions of years, and many marine species have evolved life cycles timed to take advantage of the spring bloom. In tropical oceans, where seasonal temperature changes are minimal, productivity tends to be more constant but lower overall. Nutrients are scarce in the sunlit surface waters because there is little mixing with the nutrient-rich deep water below. However, certain processes create localized areas of higher productivity. Upwelling zones, where winds or currents bring deep water to the surface, support much higher concentrations of life than surrounding areas. The cold, nutrient-rich water allows phytoplankton to bloom, and these blooms support some of the richest fisheries on Earth. When upwelling weakens due to changes in wind patterns or ocean currents, productivity declines, but it regenerates quickly when upwelling resumes. Ocean currents themselves represent a form of planetary regeneration, constantly redistributing heat, nutrients, and organisms around the globe. The Great Ocean Conveyor Belt, a system of currents that connects all the major ocean basins, takes roughly 1,000 years to complete one full cycle. Warm surface water flows from the tropics toward the poles, releasing heat to the atmosphere and gradually cooling. In the North Atlantic and around Antarctica, this water becomes cold and dense enough to sink, forming deep water masses that flow back toward the equator and eventually into the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Over centuries, this water slowly rises again, mixing upward through the water column and eventually returning to the surface, where it can once again absorb heat and nutrients and begin the cycle anew. This circulation is essential for distributing nutrients and regulating Earth's climate, and any disruption to it would have profound effects on ocean ecosystems and global weather patterns. Marine snow, the constant drift of organic particles falling from surface waters to the deep sea, represents another form of regeneration, linking the sunlit surface with the dark depths. Every day, phytoplankton cells, fecal pellets, dead zooplankton, discarded mucus-feeding structures, and other organic debris sink slowly through the water column. Most of this material is consumed or decomposed before reaching the seafloor, but a small fraction makes it all the way down, providing food for the communities that live in the abyss. This flux of material varies with the seasons, with larger pulses following spring and summer blooms in surface waters. Deep-sea organisms have adapted to this variable food supply, many of them capable of surviving long periods of scarcity by lowering their metabolic rates and waiting for the next pulse of marine snow to arrive. The deep sea floor accumulates sediments over geological timescales, and these sediments preserve a record of ocean conditions extending back millions of years. By drilling cores from the seafloor and analyzing the layers, scientists can reconstruct past climates, ocean circulation patterns, and biological productivity. These records show that the ocean has undergone many cycles of change, with ice ages alternating with warmer periods, ocean chemistry shifting, and sea levels rising and falling by hundreds of feet. Through all these changes, life has persisted, adapting and regenerating, sometimes suffering mass extinctions, but always recovering, though the recovered ecosystems may look quite different from what came before. Coral reefs, which we've already explored in terms of individual coral regeneration, also undergo regeneration at the scale of entire reef systems. After major disturbances like hurricanes, bleaching events, or disease outbreaks, reefs can recover if conditions become favorable again. The recovery process typically begins with the settlement of coral larvae, which drift in the plankton for days or weeks before settling on hard surfaces and metamorphosing into polyps. Fast-growing coral species often colonize first, quickly covering available space and beginning to build new reef structure. Over decades, slower-growing but more robust species may become more dominant, creating a more complex and resilient community. However, if disturbances occur too frequently, the reef may not have time to recover between events, potentially shifting to an alternate state dominated by algae or other organisms rather than corals. The Great Barrier Reef, the world's largest coral reef system, has experienced multiple bleaching events in recent years, raising concerns about its long-term survival. Yet even after severe bleaching, some corals survive, and some reefs show signs of recovery. The regeneration potential depends on many factors, including the severity and duration of heat stress, the presence of coral larvae from less affected areas, the control of algae by herbivorous fish, and the overall water quality. Scientists are working to understand which factors most strongly influence recovery and how management actions might support the reef's natural regenerative capacity. Kelp forests also regenerate after disturbances, though the process differs from coral reefs due to the different biology of kelp. When a storm tears away large sections of a kelp forest, the holdfast left behind may survive and produce new fronds, allowing relatively quick regrowth. Kelp also reproduces through spores, which are released in enormous numbers and can drift considerable distances before settling. If conditions are suitable, with adequate light, nutrients, and hard substrate, these spores can germinate and grow into new kelp plants. A kelp forest can recover from moderate disturbance within a few years, though recovery may be slower if herbivores like sea urchins are abundant and consume young kelp before they can establish. Sea urchin populations themselves undergo cycles of boom and bust that affect kelp forest regeneration. In some regions, sea urchin populations explode when their predators, such as sea otters or certain fish species, are removed or reduced. These urchin barrens, as they're called, can persist for years or decades, with the urchins grazing down any kelp that attempts to grow. The system can shift back to a kelp-dominated state if urchin predators return or if urchin populations crash due to disease or starvation. But the transition requires the right combination of circumstances. This illustrates how regeneration at the ecosystem level often depends on complex interactions among multiple species, not just the regenerative capacity of individual organisms. Seagrass meadows, which provide habitat for countless marine species and help stabilize coastal sediments, also regenerate after disturbances. Seagrasses can reproduce both sexually through flowers and seeds and asexually through the growth of underground stems called rhizomes. After a disturbance like a storm or a disease outbreak, seagrass recovery often begins with the growth of surviving rhizomes, which can produce new shoots relatively quickly. Sexual reproduction becomes more important for colonizing areas where all local seagrass has been removed, but this process is slower because seeds must disperse to the site, germinate, and establish before significant growth occurs. Some seagrass species have seeds that can remain dormant in sediments for years, germinating when conditions become favorable, a strategy that helps ensure regeneration even after severe disturbances. The regeneration of seagrass meadows provides benefits beyond the meadow itself. As seagrasses grow, they slow water movement, allowing suspended sediments to settle. This clarifies the water, which benefits other organisms like corals and filter-feeding invertebrates. The seagrass also takes up nutrients from the water and sediments, helping to prevent algal blooms that might otherwise occur in nutrient-enriched coastal waters. The roots and rhizomes stabilize the seafloor, reducing erosion and protecting coastlines from storm damage. All of these benefits emerge from the simple fact of seagrass regeneration, the plant's ability to grow back after being damaged or removed. Mangrove forests, which grow in the intertidal zone along tropical and subtropical coasts, also regenerate after disturbances, though the process can be slow. Mangroves are trees and shrubs adapted to tolerate salt water and to grow in soft, waterlogged sediments. They produce seeds or propagules that can float in seawater for weeks or months, allowing them to disperse over considerable distances. When a propagule encounters suitable habitat, it takes root and begins to grow. Young mangroves grow slowly at first, vulnerable to waves, currents, and herbivores. But once established, they can grow relatively quickly, with some species adding several feet of height per year under good conditions. A mature mangrove forest provides habitat for fish, crabs, birds, and many other species, protects coastlines from storm surges and erosion, and stores large amounts of carbon in its sediments and biomass. After hurricanes or other major disturbances, mangrove forests can take decades to fully recover. The regeneration process depends on the severity of damage, with lightly damaged forests recovering much faster than forests where most trees were killed. In some cases, mangrove regeneration is aided by the accumulation of sediment and organic matter, which raises the soil level and may create new areas suitable for mangrove colonization. In other cases, changes in hydrology or sediment supply can prevent regeneration, leading to long-term loss of mangrove habitat. Conservation efforts increasingly recognize the importance of protecting mangroves, not just for their current ecological value, but for their regenerative capacity, their ability to recover from disturbances and continue providing benefits into the future. Salt marshes, which occur in temperate coastal zones, undergo similar cycles of disturbance and regeneration. These marshes are dominated by grasses and other herbaceous plants that can tolerate regular flooding by tides. Like seagrasses, salt marsh plants often spread through underground rhizomes, allowing them to quickly colonize areas of bare sediment. They also produce seeds, which can disperse through water or air and establish new populations in suitable locations. Salt marshes trap sediment and organic matter, gradually building up the marsh surface over time. This process allows marshes to keep pace with slowly rising sea levels, a form of regeneration that occurs over decades and centuries. However, if sea level rises too quickly, or if sediment supply is reduced by dams or other alterations to river systems, marshes may not be able to regenerate fast enough, leading to their gradual drowning and conversion to open water. The organisms that live in salt marshes contribute to the regeneration process. Ribbed mussels, which attach to the bases of marsh grasses, filter water and deposit organic matter and nutrients near the plant roots, enhancing plant growth. Fiddler crabs dig burrows that aerate the sediment and create channels for water movement, affecting sediment chemistry and plant distribution. These and countless other interactions mean that marsh regeneration is not just about the plants themselves, but about the entire community of organisms and the physical processes they influence. Oyster reefs, which once lined many temperate coastlines, also have the capacity for regeneration. Though many historic oyster populations have been so reduced that natural regeneration is difficult, Oysters are filter feeders that attach to hard surfaces, and they often settle on the shells of other oysters, gradually building up three-dimensional reef structures. A healthy oyster reef provides habitat for many other species, filters large volumes of water, and protects shorelines from erosion. When oyster populations are reduced by overharvesting, disease, or pollution, the reefs can erode away, leaving only scattered shells or bare sediment. Regeneration in this case requires not just the recovery of oyster populations, but the rebuilding of the physical reef structure. Conservation programs in many areas are working to restore oyster reefs by placing clean shells or other hard materials on the seafloor to provide settlement surfaces for oyster larvae. When successful, these restored reefs can regenerate naturally as oysters reproduce and new generations settle on the existing structure. Fish populations also regenerate after being depleted, though the process and its success depend greatly on how severely the population was reduced and whether the factors that cause the decline have been addressed. Fish reproduce by releasing eggs, either into the water column or in nests or other protected locations. The number of eggs a female produces often increases with her size, meaning that larger, older fish contribute disproportionately to population regeneration. If fishing or other factors remove most of the large fish from population, the remaining fish may not produce enough offspring to maintain the population, even if fishing pressure is reduced. This is one reason why protecting large, old fish is increasingly recognized as important for sustainable fisheries. Some fish species can recover quickly when conditions improve. Small, fast-growing species that mature in a year or two can rebuild their populations within a few years if mortality rates decline. Larger, slower-growing species take longer, sometimes decades, to recover. The regeneration of fish populations also depends on the availability of suitable habitat. Many fish species require specific habitats for spawning or for juveniles, and if these habitats have been degraded or destroyed, population recovery may be limited even if adult fish are abundant. Marine mammals, including whales, dolphins, seals, and sea otters, generally have slower reproductive rates than fish, meaning their populations regenerate more slowly after depletion. Most marine mammals give birth to only one offspring at a time, after long gestation periods, and the young require extended parental care. A female humpback whale, for example, gives birth approximately every 2 to 3 years, and the calf nurses for about a year. This slow reproduction means that whale populations take decades to recover from severe depletion. Some whale species that were hunted nearly to extinction in the 19th and 20th centuries are still recovering, their populations slowly regenerating now that commercial whaling has largely ceased. Sea turtles, which are reptiles rather than mammals but share the ocean with them, also regenerate their populations slowly. Female sea turtles return to beaches to lay eggs, often to the same beaches where they themselves hatched decades earlier. Each female may lay several clutches of eggs in a season, with each clutch containing 50 to 200 eggs, depending on the species. However, mortality is high, with many eggs being eaten by predators, many hatchlings dying before reaching the ocean, and many juveniles being caught by predators or fishing gear. Only a small fraction of hatchlings survive to adulthood, which they reach after 15 to 30 years depending on the species. This long generation time means that sea turtle populations respond slowly to conservation measures, taking decades to show clear signs of recovery, even when threats are reduced. Seabirds, which spend much of their lives at sea but return to land to breed, also show varying capacities for population regeneration. Some species, like terns and gulls, can raise multiple chicks per year and may breed for the first time when only a few years old, allowing relatively quick population recovery. Other species, like albatrosses, lay only one egg per year or even every other year, and may not breed until they're 10 years old or older. These slow reproducing species are particularly vulnerable to threats like bycatch and fishing gear or predation by introduced mammals on breeding islands, and their populations can take many decades to recover once threats are reduced. The ocean's capacity for regeneration extends even to its chemical composition. The ocean absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, helping to moderate the pace of climate change, but also causing ocean acidification as the dissolved CO2 forms carbonic acid. This acidification can harm organisms that build shells or skeletons from calcium carbonate, including corals, mollusks, and some plankton. However, the ocean also has natural buffering systems that resist changes in pH. Over long timescales, thousands to tens of thousands of years, the weathering of rocks on land releases minerals that are carried to the ocean by rivers, and these minerals help neutralize the acidity. This geological buffering is a form of regeneration, the Earth system slowly restoring chemical balance, though it operates far too slowly to counteract the rapid acidification caused by human carbon emissions. On shorter timescales, biological processes also help regulate ocean chemistry. Phytoplankton take up carbon dioxide during photosynthesis, converting it to organic matter. Some of this carbon sinks to the deep ocean or seafloor, effectively removing it from the atmosphere-ocean system for centuries or longer. This biological carbon pump has operated throughout Earth's history, and it represents a form of regeneration at the planetary scale, the constant cycling of carbon between atmosphere, ocean, and seafloor. Changes in ocean temperature, nutrient supply, or circulation patterns can affect the efficiency of this pump, with consequences for atmospheric carbon dioxide levels and global climate. The ocean also regenerates oxygen, not just through the photosynthesis of phytoplankton, but through physical processes. When cold water at the ocean surface comes into contact with the atmosphere, it absorbs oxygen. This oxygenated water can sink and flow through the deep ocean, carrying oxygen to organisms that live far below the sunlit surface. The deep ocean's oxygen supply depends on this process, and in areas where circulation is weak or where high productivity leads to high oxygen consumption during decomposition, oxygen levels can become very low, creating what are called oxygen minimum zones. These zones expand and contract over time, responding to changes in ocean circulation, temperature, and productivity, a form of regeneration that occurs over years to decades. In some coastal areas, seasonal patterns of oxygen depletion and regeneration create challenging conditions for marine life. During summer, when water temperatures are high and stratification prevents mixing between surface and bottom waters, oxygen levels near the seafloor can drop to very low levels, especially if nutrient pollution has stimulated high productivity and subsequent decomposition. Mobile animals like fish and crabs can move away from these low oxygen zones, but sessile organisms like oysters and clams may experience high mortality. When cooler weather and storms return in fall, mixing regenerates oxygen levels, allowing organisms to return and the ecosystem to recover. This seasonal cycle has occurred naturally in some areas for thousands of years, but human activities have expanded the extent and severity of low oxygen zones in many coastal regions. The regeneration of ocean ecosystems after human impacts depends critically on reducing those impacts. Overfishing, pollution, habitat destruction, and climate change all reduce the ocean's capacity to regenerate. A coral reef can recover from a bleaching event if water temperatures return to normal, and if the reef is not subjected to additional stresses like pollution or destructive fishing practices. A fish population can rebuild if fishing pressure is reduced and if essential habitats are protected. A seagrass meadow can regrow if water quality improves and if physical disturbances like dredging or boat propeller scarring are minimized. In each case, regeneration is possible, but it requires creating conditions that allow natural processes to operate. Marine protected areas, regions where fishing and other extractive activities are limited or prohibited, can support regeneration by providing refuges where populations can recover and from which individuals can disperse to surrounding areas. Studies of well-enforced marine protected areas have shown increases in the abundance, size, and diversity of fish and invertebrates within the protected zones, and in some cases, spillover effects that benefit fisheries in adjacent areas. The regeneration observed in these protected areas demonstrates the ocean's inherent capacity to recover when given the opportunity. Restoration efforts can also support regeneration, particularly when natural recovery is slow or uncertain. Coral restoration projects grow coral fragments in nurseries and then transplant them to degraded reefs, jump-starting the regeneration process. Oyster restoration projects place shells or other materials to provide settlement surfaces, helping to rebuild reef structure. Mangrove and salt marsh restoration projects plant seedlings or alter hydrology to create conditions suitable for natural regeneration. These efforts work with natural regenerative processes rather than replacing them, providing the initial conditions or removing barriers that prevent recovery. The study of ocean regeneration continues to reveal new insights into how marine ecosystems function and how they might respond to future changes. Scientists are investigating the genetic and molecular mechanisms of regeneration in starfish, sea cucumbers, and other organisms, seeking to understand how cells know what to rebuild and how the process is controlled. Others are studying ecosystem-level regeneration, tracking how communities recover after disturbances and identifying the factors that support or hinder recovery. This research not only deepens our understanding of the ocean, but also informs conservation and management efforts, helping to identify strategies that support the ocean's natural capacity to heal and regenerate. As we consider all these forms of regeneration, from the regrowth of a starfish arm to the recovery of an entire coral reef, from the daily reproduction of plankton to the millennial circulation of ocean currents, a pattern emerges. The ocean is not a static place, but a dynamic system constantly responding to change, constantly regenerating. This regeneration occurs at every scale, from molecules to ecosystems, from seconds to millennia. It is driven by the fundamental properties of life, the ability of organisms to grow, reproduce, and repair damage, and by the physical and chemical processes that cycle energy and materials through the Earth system. The ocean moves in rhythms that stretch across time, and within those rhythms, regeneration unfolds at scales both intimate and vast. The starfish regrowing its arm is part of a pattern that extends through tidal zones, across continental shelves, and into the deepest trenches where light has never reached. Every layer of the ocean participates in cycles of renewal, and understanding these cycles brings a certain quietness to the mind, a recognition that healing is woven into the fabric of the living world. Tidal zones are places of constant change, where the boundary between land and sea shifts twice each day. Organisms that live in these zones experience exposure to air, sunlight, desiccation, and then submersion again within hours. This regular disturbance might seem harsh, but it has shaped some of the most resilient regenerative strategies on Earth. Barnacles encrusted on rocks can repair their calcium carbonate shells when damaged by waves or predators. Mussels that cluster together in dense beds can regrow byssal threads, the strong fibers that anchor them to rocks, within days if torn away by storms. Limpets, those small conical snails that cling to stone, can regenerate portions of their muscular foot if injured, allowing them to maintain their grip in the pounding surf. Anemones in tidal pools demonstrate a form of regeneration that borders on the extraordinary. If an anemone is torn in half by a strong wave or a curious gull, each half can sometimes regenerate into a complete individual. The process takes weeks, during which cells at the wound site proliferate and reorganize, guided by genetic programs that remember the body plan. The new anemone may be smaller at first, but it is whole, with a functional mouth, tentacles, and gut. This ability to become two from one is not reproduction in the usual sense, but it serves a similar function, allowing the organism to persist even after catastrophic injury. The intertidal zone also hosts algae that regenerate with remarkable speed. When a storm tears away portions of a seaweed's fronds, the remaining tissue can initiate new growth from meristematic cells, regions of active cell division similar to the growth zones in plants. Some species of rockweed can regrow lost tips within a week, their cells dividing rapidly in the presence of sunlight and nutrients. This rapid regeneration is essential in an environment where physical damage is routine, where every high tide brings the possibility of being scraped against stone or torn by the force of water. Further down, below the reach of the lowest tides, the subtidal zone extends across the continental shelf. Here, the water remains constant, and the organisms experience less dramatic fluctuations in temperature and exposure. Yet regeneration remains a central theme. Sea urchins, those spiny grazers that move slowly across the seafloor, can regenerate their tube feet, the small hydraulic appendages they use for locomotion and feeding. If a tube foot is damaged or bitten off by a fish, the urchin can regrow it over the course of several weeks, the new structure emerging from the body wall and gradually extending until it matches the others in length and function. Sea urchins also regenerate their spines, which are modified skeletal elements made of calcite. When a spine breaks, the urchin's body begins depositing new calcium carbonate at the base, building the spine back up layer by layer. The process is slow, but it is continuous, and an urchin that survives to adulthood may have regenerated dozens of spines over its lifetime. This ongoing repair is necessary because the spines serve as both defense and locomotion, and without them, the urchin becomes vulnerable to predators and unable to move efficiently. The floors of kelp forests are home to brittle stars, relatives of starfish with long, slender arms that can number 5 or more. Brittle stars are even more prone to losing limbs than starfish, and their regenerative capacity reflects this vulnerability. A brittle star can autotomize an arm when threatened, sacrificing the limb to escape a predator's grasp. The lost arm wriggles independently for a time, distracting the predator while the rest of the animal flees. Within days, a small bud appears at the site of the lost arm, and over weeks or months, the arm regrows, segment by segment, until it is indistinguishable from the others. Some brittle stars in the wild are found with multiple arms in various stages of regeneration, evidence of repeated encounters with danger and repeated recoveries. Crabs, those armored scavengers and predators, also regenerate lost limbs. When a crab loses a claw or a leg, either through injury or intentional autotomy, a small limb bud forms at the site during the next molt. With each subsequent molt, the new limb grows larger, until after several molts it reaches full size and function. The regenerated limb may not be identical to the original, sometimes slightly smaller or shaped differently, but it is functional. This regeneration is tied to the crab's molting cycle, the periodic shedding of its exoskeleton that allows for growth. Without molting, regeneration cannot proceed, linking the processes of growth and repair in a single biological rhythm. Lobsters regenerate in much the same way, their large claws capable of regrowing over multiple molts. A lobster that loses its crusher claw, the larger of the two, will often regenerate a claw that takes on the function of the lost one, while the remaining claw may shift in function to compensate. This plasticity, the ability to adjust not just structure but role, speaks to a deeper flexibility in the developmental programs that guide regeneration. The animal does not simply replace what was lost. It adapts to the new configuration, reorganizing its behavior and physiology to match. In the open ocean, far from the seafloor, regeneration takes different forms. Jellyfish, those drifting medusae, can regenerate damaged bell tissue and tentacles. If a jellyfish's bell is torn by a predator or a collision, the edges of the wound begin to contract and heal, and new tissue grows inward to close the gap. Tentacles, if lost, can regrow from the bell margin, the cells at the edge dividing and extending to form new cnidocyte-laden strands. The process is slower than in some benthic organisms, but it is effective, allowing the jellyfish to continue feeding and moving even after significant injury. Some species of jellyfish can also regenerate after more severe damage. If a jellyfish is fragmented into pieces, certain species can regenerate whole individuals from the fragments, provided each piece contains enough of the original body structure. This is not common among all jellyfish, but in those species where it occurs, it represents a form of asexual reproduction that blurs the line between regeneration and cloning. The new jellyfish are genetically identical to the original, each one a continuation of the same individual in a sense, dispersed across the water. Salps, those gelatinous filter feeders that form long chains in the open ocean, regenerate in their own way. Individual salps within a chain are connected by tissue, and if the chain is broken, each salp can survive independently. The broken ends of the tissue heal, and the individual salps continue to feed and grow. Some species can also regenerate damaged portions of their tunic, the outer gelatinous layer that gives them structure. The tunic is secreted by the salp's epidermis, and if it is torn, the cells can produce new tunic material to repair the damage, restoring the integrity of the body. Comb jellies, or ctenophores, possess a regenerative ability that rivals that of planarians. If a comb jelly is cut in half, each half can regenerate into a complete individual. The process involves the reorganization of existing tissues and the proliferation of new cells, guided by signals that re-establish the body's polarity and symmetry. Researchers have found that comb jellies can regenerate even after being reduced to small fragments, as long as the fragments contain a sufficient diversity of cell types. This resilience suggests that comb jellies retain a high degree of cellular plasticity throughout their lives, their cells capable of dedifferentiating and taking on new roles as needed. The regeneration of these gelatinous animals is particularly interesting because their bodies are so simple, composed mostly of water and a relatively small number of cell types. Yet within that simplicity lies a profound flexibility, a capacity to rebuild that does not depend on complex organs or specialized tissues. The comb jelly's body is more like a living gel, a matrix of cells and extracellular material that can be reshaped and reorganized with relative ease. This simplicity may, paradoxically, be the source of its regenerative power, the lack of rigid structure allowing for greater adaptability. Deeper still, in the mesopelagic zone where sunlight fades to a dim blue glow, regeneration continues. Lanternfish, those small bioluminescent fish that migrate vertically each night, can regenerate damaged fins. If a fin is torn by a predator or caught on debris, the fish's body initiates a healing response, and the fin begins to regrow from the base. The process takes weeks, during which the fish may be less maneuverable, but the fin eventually returns to full function. This regeneration is similar to that seen in shallow water fish. The underlying mechanisms conserved across species and environments. Deep-sea squid can regenerate lost tentacles, though the process is slower in the cold, low-energy environment of the deep ocean. If a squid loses a feeding tentacle to a predator, the remaining tissue begins to form a bud, and over months, the tentacle regrows. The new tentacle may be slightly shorter or less muscular than the original, but it retains the suckers and hooks necessary for capturing prey. This regeneration is energetically costly, and the squid must balance the investment in regrowth with the need to feed and avoid predators in an environment where food is scarce. Hagfish, those primitive jawless fish that scavenge on the deep sea floor, can regenerate portions of their skin and slime glands. Hagfish are famous for producing copious amounts of slime when threatened, a defense mechanism that can clog the gills of predators. The slime glands are specialized structures, and if they are damaged or lost, the hagfish can regenerate them over time. The skin, too, can heal and regenerate, the cells at the wound edge migrating inward and proliferating to close the gap. This regenerative capacity is essential for an animal that lives in close contact with the seafloor, where abrasion and injury are common. The deep sea floor itself undergoes regeneration after disturbances. When a whale carcass falls to the seafloor, it creates a localized zone of intense biological activity. Scavengers arrive first, consuming the soft tissues, followed by bacteria that break down the bones. Over years or decades, the whale fall becomes a small ecosystem, supporting species found nowhere else. Eventually, the nutrients are exhausted and the community disperses. The seafloor then regenerates, the sediment gradually covering the bones, and the surrounding fauna recolonizing the area. This cycle of disturbance and recovery is a form of regeneration at the ecosystem level, the community rebuilding itself after the temporary disruption. Hydrothermal vent communities also regenerate after disturbances. Vents are ephemeral features, their activity waxing and waning over years or decades as the underlying magma chambers shift. When a vent becomes inactive, the chemosynthetic bacteria that form the base of the food web die off, and the animals that depend on them must disperse or perish. But when a new vent opens, either nearby or hundreds of kilometers away, larvae from distant populations arrive and colonize the new site. Within months, a new community establishes itself, the tube worms, clams, and crabs rebuilding the ecosystem from scratch. This process is not regeneration in the strictest sense, but it is a form of renewal, the ecosystem reassembling itself through dispersal and colonization. Cold seeps, areas where methane and other hydrocarbons leak from the seafloor, support similar communities. These seeps can persist for centuries, much longer than hydrothermal vents, but they too experience fluctuations in activity. When a seep's flow decreases, the community contracts, and when it increases, the community expands. The animals that live at seeps have long lifespans, some clams living for over a century, and their slow growth and reproduction mean that recovery from disturbance takes decades. Yet the system does recover, the populations gradually rebuilding as conditions stabilize. The abyssal plains, those vast flat regions that cover much of the deep ocean floor, regenerate slowly after disturbances. When deep-sea mining equipment scrapes the seafloor, removing sediment and crushing organisms, the affected area can take decades or even centuries to recover. The sediment itself regenerates through the slow accumulation of marine snow, particles of organic matter that drift down from the surface. The fauna, however, recover much more slowly. Deep-sea organisms grow slowly and reproduce infrequently, and the recolonization of disturbed areas depends on larvae or juveniles arriving from undisturbed regions nearby. If the disturbance is too large, or if it is repeated frequently, the ecosystem may not recover fully, the diversity and structure permanently altered. This slow recovery highlights the importance of protecting deep-sea ecosystems from human impacts. Unlike shallow water environments, where regeneration can occur within years, deep-sea regeneration operates on timescales that span human lifetimes. A single mining operation could create scars on the seafloor that persist for a century, and the loss of species from these areas might be irreversible if their populations are small and isolated. Understanding the regenerative capacity of deep-sea ecosystems is essential for making informed decisions about how we use and protect these environments. In the polar oceans, regeneration is shaped by the extreme cold and the seasonal availability of light and food. Antarctic starfish regenerate their arms just as their temperate relatives do. But the process takes longer, the cold temperatures slowing cellular metabolism and growth. A starfish in Antarctic waters might take a year or more to fully regenerate a lost arm, compared to a few months for a starfish in warmer seas. Yet the regeneration is just as complete, the new arm eventually matching the others in size and function. This slower pace reflects the overall rhythm of life in polar waters, where growth and reproduction are tied to the brief summer bloom of phytoplankton. Antarctic sponges, some of the slowest growing animals on Earth, also regenerate slowly. If a sponge is damaged by ice scour or a foraging predator, it can repair the damage, but the process may take years. The sponge's cells gradually migrate to the wound site, secreting new skeletal elements and rebuilding the tissue. Some Antarctic sponges are estimated to be hundreds or even thousands of years old, their slow growth and regeneration allowing them to persist through centuries of environmental change. These ancient organisms are living records of the ocean's history, their bodies accumulating layers of growth like the rings of a tree. In the Arctic, sea ice itself undergoes a form of regeneration. Each winter, the ocean's surface freezes, forming a layer of ice that can be several meters thick. Within this ice, brine channels form, small pockets and tubes of concentrated salt water where microbial communities thrive. These ice algae and bacteria are the base of the Arctic food web, supporting krill, fish, and eventually seals and whales. Each spring, as the ice melts, these communities are released into the water, seeding the phytoplankton bloom that follows. Each autumn, as the ice reforms, new communities establish themselves within the ice. This annual cycle of freezing and melting, of community formation and dissolution, is a form of regeneration, the ecosystem rebuilding itself with each turn of the seasons. The seasonal ice also supports larger organisms that depend on its presence. Ringed seals give birth on the ice, creating dens in the snow where their pups are sheltered from predators and the elements. Polar bears hunt seals on the ice, using it as a platform to access their prey. As the climate warms and the extent and duration of sea ice decline, these species face increasing challenges. The ice itself still regenerates each winter, but it is thinner and melts earlier, reducing the time available for hunting and breeding. The regeneration of the ice is thus linked to the survival of the species that depend on it, and changes in one affect the other. Coral reefs in tropical waters continue their cycles of growth and regeneration, but the pace and success of regeneration depend heavily on environmental conditions. Reefs that experience frequent bleaching events caused by elevated water temperatures have less time to recover between disturbances. Corals that survive a bleaching event must rebuild their symbiotic algae populations and repair damaged tissue, processes that take months to years. If another bleaching event occurs before recovery is complete, the corals may not survive, and the reef can shift to a state dominated by algae rather than coral. This shift represents a failure of regeneration, the system unable to return to its previous state because the disturbances are too frequent or too severe. Yet even degraded reefs can regenerate if conditions improve. When temperatures stabilize and water quality improves, coral larvae can settle and grow, gradually rebuilding the reef structure. This recovery is faster if there are nearby healthy reefs that can supply larvae, and if the substrate is suitable for settlement. Some restoration projects assist this process by transplanting coral fragments or creating artificial structures that provide settlement sites. These interventions can accelerate regeneration, but they are most effective when combined with efforts to address the underlying causes of reef degradation, such as pollution, overfishing, and climate change. Mangrove forests, those coastal ecosystems that bridge land and sea, regenerate after disturbances like hurricanes and tsunamis. When a storm topples mangrove trees and strips away leaves and branches, the surviving trees can resprout from their trunks and roots. Mangrove seeds, which germinate while still attached to the parent tree, can also colonize newly exposed mud, establishing new stands of trees. The process of regeneration takes years, the young trees growing slowly in the saline, waterlogged soil. But over time, the forest recovers, the canopy closing and the root systems stabilizing the sediment once again. Mangroves also regenerate after human disturbances, such as clear-cutting for aquaculture or coastal development. If the hydrology of the area is intact and the soil has not been too severely degraded, mangroves can recolonize naturally, their seeds arriving on the tide and taking root. Restoration projects often plant mangrove seedlings to accelerate this process, and in many cases, these efforts are successful, the young trees growing into mature forests within a decade or two. The success of mangrove regeneration depends on protecting the remaining forests and restoring the natural flow of water and sediment that mangroves require. Salt marshes, those grassy wetlands found in temperate coastal areas, also regenerate after disturbances. When a storm erodes the marsh edge or deposits a thick layer of sediment, the marsh grasses can regrow from their roots and rhizomes, the underground stems that spread through the soil. Marsh grasses are adapted to tolerate flooding and salt, and they can quickly recolonize disturbed areas if the conditions are right. The regeneration of salt marshes is important for coastal protection, as the grasses stabilize the soil and absorb wave energy, reducing erosion and flooding in adjacent areas. Salt marshes also provide critical habitat for fish, birds, and invertebrates, and their regeneration supports the recovery of these populations. Young fish use the marsh as a nursery, feeding on the abundant invertebrates and finding shelter among the grass stems. Birds nest in the marsh or use it as a stopover during migration, feeding on seeds, insects, and small fish. The health of these species is tied to the health of the marsh, and the regeneration of the marsh after disturbance ensures that these ecological functions continue. Seagrass meadows, as discussed earlier, regenerate through both vegetative growth and sexual reproduction. The balance between these two modes of regeneration depends on the severity and frequency of disturbances. Small disturbances, like the grazing of sea turtles or the scouring of boat anchors, are often repaired through vegetative growth, the rhizomes spreading to fill the gap. Larger disturbances, like hurricanes or dredging, may require sexual reproduction, the seeds germinating and establishing new patches of seagrass. The regeneration of seagrass meadows is slower than that of many other coastal ecosystems, taking years or even decades for a meadow to fully recover. But it is possible if the water quality is good and the disturbances are not too frequent. The regeneration of coastal ecosystems is increasingly important as human populations grow and coastal development expands. Wetlands, mangroves, and seagrass meadows provide valuable services, including storm protection, water filtration, and carbon storage, and their loss reduces the resilience of coastal communities to climate change and extreme weather. Protecting and restoring these ecosystems is essential for maintaining these services, and understanding their regenerative capacity helps guide restoration efforts. In the open ocean, the regeneration of fish populations is a critical concern for fisheries management. Overfishing can deplete fish stocks to the point where they cannot recover, the population falling below the threshold needed for successful reproduction. When this happens, the ecosystem can shift to a new state, with different species dominating and the original species unable to return even if fishing pressure is reduced. Preventing this outcome requires managing fisheries to allow populations to regenerate, setting catch limits that ensure enough adults survive to reproduce and enough juveniles survive to adulthood. Some fish populations have demonstrated remarkable regenerative capacity when given the chance. The Atlantic striped bass, once depleted along the U.S. East Coast, recovered after a moratorium on fishing was implemented in the 1980s. Within a decade, the population had rebounded, and the fishery was reopened with strict management measures in place. This recovery was possible because the striped bass is a relatively fast-growing, prolific species, and because enough habitat remained to support the recovering population. Similar recoveries have been seen in other species, including haddock, Atlantic cod in some regions, and various rockfish species along the U.S. West Coast. However, not all fish populations recover so readily. Slow-growing, long-lived species like orange roughy and certain sharks can take decades to recover from overfishing, if they recover at all. These species have low reproductive rates, producing few offspring each year, and they may not reach reproductive maturity until they are many years old. When these populations are depleted, the regeneration process is slow, and the fishery may not be sustainable even with reduced catch limits. Protecting these species requires more conservative management, including large marine protected areas where fishing is prohibited and populations can rebuild without human interference. Marine protected areas, or MPAs, are one of the most effective tools for promoting the regeneration of ocean ecosystems. By prohibiting or limiting fishing and other extractive activities, MPAs allow populations to recover and ecosystems to rebuild. Studies have shown that fish populations inside MPAs often increase in abundance and size, and that these benefits can spill over into adjacent areas, supporting fisheries outside the protected zone. MPAs also protect habitat, ensuring that the physical structures and ecological processes that support regeneration remain intact. The design and placement of MPAs are important for their effectiveness. MPAs need to be large enough to encompass critical habitats and to support viable populations of the species they aim to protect. They also need to be connected to other protected areas, allowing for the movement of larvae and adults between sites. This connectivity is essential for the regeneration of populations, as it ensures genetic diversity and allows for recolonization after local disturbances. Networks of MPAs, rather than isolated reserves, are more effective at promoting regeneration and resilience across large regions. The regeneration of ocean ecosystems is also supported by efforts to reduce pollution and improve water quality. Nutrient pollution from agriculture and sewage can cause algal blooms in dead zones, areas where oxygen levels are too low to support most marine life. Reducing nutrient inputs allows these areas to recover, the oxygen levels rising and the fauna returning. This recovery can happen relatively quickly, within months or years, if the pollution is reduced and the physical conditions are favorable. The regeneration of dead zones demonstrates the ocean's capacity to heal when the sources of stress are removed. Plastic pollution, however, poses a more persistent challenge. Plastics do not biodegrade in the ocean. Instead, they break down into smaller and smaller pieces, eventually becoming microplastics that are ingested by marine organisms. These microplastics can accumulate in the food web, affecting the health of animals from plankton to whales. The ocean cannot regenerate from plastic pollution in the way it can from nutrient pollution, because the plastic remains in the environment for decades or centuries. Addressing plastic pollution requires preventing plastics from entering the ocean in the first place through better waste management, reduced plastic use, and the development of biodegradable alternatives. Climate change is perhaps the greatest challenge to ocean regeneration. Rising temperatures, ocean acidification, and changes in ocean circulation are altering the conditions that marine organisms depend on. Some species are able to adapt or shift their ranges, but others are not, and the pace of change may exceed the capacity of ecosystems to regenerate. Coral reefs, as mentioned, are particularly vulnerable, but other ecosystems are also at risk. Kelp forests are declining in some regions due to warming waters and the proliferation of sea urchins. Seagrass meadows are affected by rising temperatures and changing salinity. The regeneration of these ecosystems depends on stabilizing the climate and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, actions that require global cooperation and long-term commitment. Yet even in the face of these challenges, the ocean continues to demonstrate its regenerative capacity. After the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in 2010, one of the largest environmental disasters in history, the affected ecosystems began to recover. The oil degraded over time, broken down by bacteria and dispersed by currents. Fish populations rebounded, and coral reefs showed signs of recovery. The recovery was not complete, and some impacts persist, but the ocean's ability to heal itself, even after such a massive disturbance, is a testament to its resilience. This resilience is not infinite. However, the ocean's regenerative capacity depends on the health of its ecosystems, the diversity of its species, and the stability of its physical and chemical conditions. When these factors are compromised, regeneration slows or fails, and the ocean shifts to a degraded state that may be difficult or impossible to reverse. Protecting the ocean's regenerative capacity requires reducing human impacts, conserving critical habitats, and addressing the global challenges of climate change and pollution. The study of ocean regeneration is a field that combines biology, ecology, oceanography, and conservation science. Researchers investigate the mechanisms of regeneration at the cellular, organismal, and ecosystem levels, seeking to understand how and why regeneration occurs and what factors influence its success. This knowledge informs conservation and management strategies, helping to protect and restore ocean ecosystems. It also inspires hope, revealing the ocean's remarkable capacity to heal and renew itself when given the chance. In the quiet depths, in the sunlit shallows, in the cold polar seas, and the warm tropical lagoons, regeneration is always underway. Cells divide, tissues grow, limbs extend, and ecosystems rebuild. The ocean is never static. It is always in the process of becoming, always responding to change, always regenerating. This ongoing renewal is a source of calm, a reminder that healing is possible, that damage is not always permanent, and that life, in all its forms, is resilient. The ocean's capacity for renewal extends through every layer of water, every grain of sediment, every creature that moves through the blue. We have traveled through starfish arms regrowing on rocky shores, through coral polyps rebuilding reefs, through kelp forests rising again after storms. We have witnessed the patient work of cells dividing in darkness, of chemical signals moving through tissue, of entire ecosystems reorganizing themselves after disturbance. And now, as our journey begins to settle, we can look across all these processes and see them not as separate facts, but as expressions of a single principle that moves through living systems everywhere. Regeneration is not miraculous. It is ordinary in the deepest sense. It is what life does when given time and the right conditions. The starfish does not decide to regrow its arm through willpower or determination. It simply follows the instructions written into its cells, instructions refined over hundreds of millions of years. The coral polyp does not choose resilience. It responds to its environment according to patterns encoded in its DNA, patterns that have allowed its ancestors to survive countless changes in ocean chemistry, temperature, and light. These processes feel remarkable to us because we observe them from outside, with our brief human timescales and our tendency to see intention where there is only mechanism. But mechanism does not diminish wonder. Understanding how regeneration works, understanding the genes that activate and the proteins that fold and the cells that migrate, does not make the process less beautiful. It makes it more so, because we can see that regeneration is not magic granted to a few special creatures. It is a possibility built into the structure of life itself, expressed differently across species, shaped by evolution in countless variations, but fundamentally similar at the molecular level. The same cellular processes that allow a starfish to regrow an arm also allow your skin to heal after a cut, allow a tree to seal a wound with new bark, allow a salamander to regenerate a lost tail. The ocean holds these processes in a particularly visible form because marine creatures often face environments where injury is common and regeneration is advantageous. A starfish clinging to rocks in the intertidal zone will be battered by waves, scraped by predators, stressed by temperature changes. The ability to regrow lost parts means the difference between death and survival. A coral colony growing on a reef will be broken by storms, grazed by fish, invaded by disease. The ability to heal and expand means the colony can persist for centuries, becoming the foundation for an entire ecosystem. Natural selection has favored regenerative capacity in these creatures because the ocean is both generous and harsh, offering abundant life while constantly testing it. And so the ocean becomes a library of regenerative strategies. Each species represents a different solution to the problem of damage and loss. Some creatures, like starfish, can regrow entire limbs complete with organs and nervous tissue. Others, like sea cucumbers, can expel and regenerate internal organs. Still others, like certain jellyfish, can reverse their life cycle entirely, returning to a juvenile state when conditions become unfavorable. Some sponges can be broken into individual cells, and those cells will find each other and reorganize into a functioning sponge again. Each strategy reflects the particular challenges and opportunities of that creature's environment, the particular history of its evolutionary lineage, the particular constraints of its body plan. These strategies are not perfect. Regeneration requires energy, resources, and time. A starfish regrowing an arm must divert nutrients from other processes. It may grow more slowly, reproduce less, be more vulnerable to subsequent injuries. The regrown arm may not be identical to the original. It may be slightly smaller, slightly different in shape, slightly less sensitive. Evolution does not produce perfection. It produces solutions that are good enough to allow survival and reproduction in a given environment. Regeneration is one such solution, valuable enough to be maintained across millions of years, but still subject to trade-offs and limitations. The limitations become more apparent when environments change rapidly. A starfish that can regrow an arm in cool, clean water may struggle to do so in water that is too warm or too acidic. The cellular processes that drive regeneration are sensitive to temperature, pH, oxygen levels, and the presence of pollutants. When these factors shift beyond the range that the starfish's ancestors experienced, the ancient instructions encoded in its DNA may no longer produce reliable results. Proteins may fold incorrectly. Chemical signals may be disrupted. Cell division may slow or stop. The same creature that seemed so resilient in stable conditions becomes vulnerable when conditions change too quickly for evolution to keep pace. This is why the current state of the ocean matters so much for regeneration. The ocean is changing faster now than at almost any point in the past several million years. Carbon dioxide from human activities is dissolving into seawater, making it more acidic. Heat is accumulating in the upper layers, raising temperatures and altering currents. Nutrients are washing off land in excessive amounts, creating dead zones where oxygen drops too low for most life. Plastics are fragmenting into particles that enter food webs and accumulate in tissues. These changes are happening simultaneously, interacting in ways that scientists are still working to understand, creating conditions that many marine creatures have never encountered before. Under these conditions, regeneration becomes more difficult. A coral polyp trying to rebuild after bleaching must do so in water that may be warmer and more acidic than the water its ancestors knew. A kelp forest trying to recover after a storm must contend with herbivores whose populations have exploded due to the absence of predators, themselves depleted by overfishing. A seagrass meadow trying to expand must grow in water clouded by sediment from coastal development, reducing the light available for photosynthesis. Each additional stressor makes regeneration less likely to succeed, not because the organisms lack the capacity, but because they are being asked to perform complex biological processes under increasingly unfavorable conditions. And yet regeneration continues. Even in degraded environments, even under stress, life attempts to repair itself. Coral reefs that have lost most of their cover can still produce larvae that settle and grow. Kelp forests that have been reduced to fragments can still send out spores that drift and attach. Seagrass meadows that have been damaged by boat propellers can still spread through rhizomes, slowly filling in the gaps. Starfish that have lost arms to predators or disease can still activate the cellular machinery of regeneration, even if the process takes longer or succeeds less often. The capacity persists because it is woven into the fundamental biology of these organisms, not easily erased even when conditions become difficult. This persistence offers a kind of hope, but it is hope that must be understood carefully. The ocean's ability to regenerate is real, but it is not infinite. It depends on the presence of healthy populations that can produce offspring, on the existence of refuges where conditions remain favorable, on the absence of stressors so severe that they overwhelm biological capacity entirely. Regeneration is not a guarantee. It is a possibility that becomes more or less likely depending on the choices humans make about how we interact with the ocean. Those choices are being made now, in this decade, in these years. Decisions about carbon emissions, about fishing practices, about coastal development, about pollution control, about the creation and enforcement of marine protected areas. Each decision either supports or undermines the ocean's regenerative capacity. Each decision either gives marine life the conditions it needs to repair and recover, or adds another stressor that makes recovery less likely. The science is clear about what needs to happen. Carbon emissions must decrease rapidly to slow ocean warming and acidification. Overfishing must end, allowing populations to rebuild. Pollution must be reduced, especially plastics and nutrients. Coastal habitats must be protected and restored. Marine protected areas must be expanded and enforced. These actions are not technically difficult. Humanity possesses the knowledge and technology to accomplish all of them. What is required is not new inventions or scientific breakthroughs, but collective will and coordinated effort. The barriers are political, economic, and social rather than technical. And so the question of whether the ocean will continue to regenerate, whether coral reefs will persist, whether kelp forests will thrive, whether starfish will regrow their arms in clean water, becomes a question about human society rather than about marine biology. The ocean has shown us what it can do. Now the outcome depends on what we choose to do. While those large-scale choices are being made, regeneration continues in small moments everywhere. A starfish on a rock in Oregon extends its tube feet, moving slowly across stone, its regrown arms slightly paler than the others but functional, strong, alive. A coral polyp on a reef in the Caribbean extends its tentacles into the current, feeding, growing, budding off new polyps that will expand the colony millimeter by millimeter. A kelp plant off the coast of California releases spores into the water, millions of microscopic packages of potential, each one capable of settling and growing into a new plant if it finds the right conditions. A seagrass meadow in the Mediterranean spreads through the sediment, rhizomes extending, roots anchoring, leaves rising toward the light. These small moments accumulate. A single coral polyp is tiny, but a reef is made of billions of them. Their combined growth creating structures visible from space. A single kelp plant is fragile, but a forest is made of thousands of them. Their combined presence creating a three-dimensional habitat that supports entire food webs. A single seagrass shoot is easily overlooked, but a meadow is made of millions of them. Their combined roots stabilizing sediment, and their combined leaves producing oxygen and sheltering fish. Regeneration at the individual level becomes regeneration at the ecosystem level through this accumulation of small processes, each one following simple rules, together creating complexity and resilience. The starfish, in this sense, is both an individual and a symbol. As an individual, it is a creature following its biological programming, responding to injury by activating genes and producing proteins and dividing cells. As a symbol, it represents the broader principle of regeneration that moves through the entire ocean, the capacity of life to repair itself when given the opportunity. When we watch a starfish slowly regrowing an arm, we are watching a process that connects to everything else we have explored. The coral rebuilding its skeleton, the kelp forest recovering from disturbance, the seagrass meadow expanding in a bare sediment, the mangrove forest trapping sediment and building land, the oyster reef filtering water and providing habitat. All of these processes share common elements. They require energy, usually from the sun through photosynthesis or from food through consumption. They require nutrients, the chemical building blocks of proteins and DNA, and cell membranes. They require time, because biological processes cannot be rushed beyond certain limits set by chemistry and physics. They require relatively stable conditions, because extreme fluctuations in temperature, salinity, or pH can disrupt the delicate mechanisms of cellular function. And they require the absence of overwhelming disturbance, because regeneration can only proceed when damage occurs at a rate slower than repair. When these requirements are met, regeneration proceeds according to patterns refined over evolutionary time. The patterns are not rigid. There is variation among individuals, variation among populations, variation among species. Some starfish regenerate faster than others. Some coral species are more tolerant of warm water than others. Some kelp populations recover more quickly after storms than others. This variation is itself important, because it means that populations contain individuals with different capacities, different tolerances, different strategies. When conditions change, this variation provides the raw material for natural selection to act upon, allowing populations to adapt over generations. Adaptation through natural selection is a form of regeneration at the level of populations and species. Just as an individual starfish can regrow a lost arm, a population can regrow lost genetic diversity through reproduction and mutation. Just as a coral colony can recover from partial mortality, a species can recover from population declines if enough individuals survive to reproduce. The timescales are different. Regeneration of genetic diversity and population structure takes generations rather than weeks or months, but the underlying principle is similar. Life has mechanisms for repair and recovery operating at multiple scales, from cells to individuals to populations to ecosystems. These mechanisms are ancient. The basic cellular processes involved in regeneration, the genes that control cell division and differentiation, the proteins that form scaffolds and signals, these have been conserved across hundreds of millions of years of evolution. The starfish regrowing its arm today uses genetic instructions that are fundamentally similar to those used by its ancestors in Paleozoic seas. The coral polyp building its skeleton uses a process that has continued, with variations, since corals first appeared in the fossil record. The continuity is remarkable. These are not new solutions invented recently. They are old solutions, tested across vast spans of time, refined through countless generations, proven effective by the simple fact that the lineages employing them still exist. The ocean itself has regenerated many times over geological history. There have been periods of mass extinction when large percentages of marine species disappeared, followed by periods of recovery when surviving lineages diversified and filled the empty ecological roles. The recovery takes millions of years, an almost incomprehensible span of time from a human perspective, but it happens. The ocean does not remain empty. Life finds ways to persist, to adapt, to diversify. The fossil record shows this pattern repeatedly: collapse and recovery, extinction and innovation, loss and renewal. We are not living in a period of mass extinction on the scale of the greatest events in Earth's history, but we are living in a period of rapid change and significant loss. Species are disappearing faster than they have in millions of years. Ecosystems are being degraded across large areas. The ocean's chemistry and temperature are shifting in ways that challenge many organisms, and yet the capacity for regeneration persists. The question is not whether the ocean can regenerate in some form, over some timescale. The question is what form that regeneration will take, how long it will require, and whether it will include the species and ecosystems that exist today. This is where human choices become critical. The ocean will continue in some form regardless of what humans do. Life is resilient at the largest scales and longest timescales. But the particular forms of life, the particular species, the particular ecosystems, these are not guaranteed. A coral reef that dies may eventually be replaced by some other ecosystem, but it may not be replaced by a coral reef. A kelp forest that is destroyed may be succeeded by an urchin barren or an algal turf, states that can persist for decades without returning to kelp dominance. The ocean's regeneration does not necessarily mean restoration to previous conditions. It means the emergence of whatever forms of life can survive and reproduce in the new conditions. If we want the ocean to regenerate in ways that preserve the diversity and complexity we value, if we want coral reefs and kelp forests and seagrass meadows and mangroves and all the creatures that depend on them, including starfish regrowing their arms on rocky shores, then we must create conditions that allow those specific forms of regeneration to succeed. This requires reducing the stressors that make regeneration difficult or impossible. It requires protecting the places and populations that serve as sources of recovery. It requires thinking in terms of decades and centuries rather than quarters and election cycles. It requires recognizing that the ocean's health and humanity's well-being are connected, not separate. The science of regeneration offers guidance for these efforts. By understanding how organisms regrow lost parts, how ecosystems recover from disturbance, how populations adapt to changing conditions, scientists can identify the factors that support or hinder recovery. This knowledge can inform decisions about where to create marine protected areas, how to design restoration projects, which populations to prioritize for conservation, how to manage fisheries to allow rebuilding. The research continues, with new discoveries emerging regularly, new details being added to our understanding of how regeneration works at molecular, cellular, organismal, and ecosystem levels. Some of that research focuses on the genes and proteins involved in regeneration, seeking to understand why some species can regrow entire body parts while others cannot. Scientists have identified specific genes that are activated during starfish arm regeneration, genes that control cell division, cell migration, and tissue differentiation. By comparing these genes across species with different regenerative capacities, researchers are beginning to understand the genetic basis of regeneration and how it evolved. This knowledge has potential applications beyond marine biology, potentially informing medical research on tissue repair and organ regeneration in humans. Other research focuses on the environmental conditions that support regeneration. Scientists conduct experiments exposing organisms to different temperatures, pH levels, nutrient concentrations, and pollutants, measuring how these factors affect regenerative success. The results help predict how climate change and other human impacts will affect the ocean's capacity for recovery. They also help identify thresholds beyond which regeneration becomes unlikely, providing targets for environmental policy. If we know that coral regeneration declines sharply when water temperature exceeds a certain level for a certain duration, we can work to prevent those conditions from occurring or persisting. Still, other research focuses on ecosystem-level regeneration, studying how communities of organisms recover after disturbances like storms, disease outbreaks, or fishing pressure. Scientists monitor sites over years or decades, documenting which species return first, how community composition changes over time, whether ecosystems return to their previous state or shift to alternative configurations. This work reveals that regeneration at the ecosystem level is complex and contingent, depending not just on the regenerative capacity of individual species, but on interactions among species, on the availability of larvae or seeds from nearby areas, on the presence or absence of key facilitators like herbivores or predators. The complexity means that supporting ocean regeneration requires more than protecting individual species. It requires maintaining the connections that allow larvae to disperse from healthy populations to degraded areas. It requires preserving the full complement of species that make an ecosystem function, including less charismatic organisms like invertebrates and algae. It requires managing human activities at appropriate scales, recognizing that local actions can have regional or even global consequences through currents, trade, and atmospheric connections. Marine protected areas are one of the most effective tools for supporting regeneration. By restricting fishing and other extractive activities in designated areas, MPAs allow populations to rebuild and ecosystems to recover. The evidence from existing MPAs shows that they work. Fish populations inside MPAs are typically larger, older, and more abundant than populations in fished areas. Coral reefs inside MPAs often have more live coral cover and greater structural complexity. Kelp forests inside MPAs can support more diverse communities of invertebrates and fish. The benefits extend beyond MPA boundaries as larvae and adults spill over into surrounding areas, supporting fisheries and ecosystem function across larger regions. But MPAs alone are not sufficient. They protect areas from direct exploitation, but cannot shield them from climate change, ocean acidification, or pollution that arrives from distant sources. A marine reserve can prevent overfishing, but cannot prevent warming water from causing coral bleaching. It can protect kelp forests from harvest, but cannot prevent herbivore outbreaks triggered by ecosystem changes elsewhere. Effective ocean regeneration requires combining local protection with global action on climate and pollution, addressing both the immediate and the underlying causes of ecosystem degradation. This combination of local and global action is beginning to happen, though not yet at the scale or speed required. Countries are creating new marine protected areas and expanding existing ones. International agreements are being negotiated to address plastic pollution, overfishing, and deep-sea mining. Carbon emissions are starting to decline in some regions, though not yet globally. Restoration projects are underway for coral reefs, seagrass meadows, mangroves, and oyster reefs, with varying degrees of success. The trajectory is not yet sufficient to prevent further degradation, but it represents movement in the right direction. The starfish, moving slowly across its rock, is unaware of these human efforts. It responds only to its immediate environment: the temperature of the water, the presence of prey, the texture of the substrate beneath its tube feet. Its regrown arm functions well enough. The creature feeds, moves, survives. If the water remains clean and cool, if prey remains available, if no new injuries occur, the starfish may live for years or decades, a small persistent presence in the intertidal zone. Its existence does not depend on human awareness or concern. It simply continues, following the instructions encoded in its cells, shaped by evolution, part of the ocean's ongoing process of life and regeneration. And yet our awareness matters, not to this individual starfish, but to the countless others like it, to the populations and species and ecosystems they belong to the future of the ocean as a living system. By understanding regeneration, by studying how it works and what it requires, by making choices that support rather than undermine it, humans can influence whether the ocean's regenerative capacity continues to function. We cannot control it, cannot manage it in any complete sense, but we can create conditions that make it more or less likely to succeed. This is a form of humility, recognizing that we do not need to engineer every process, do not need to micromanage every ecosystem, but rather need to step back from activities that cause harm and allow the ocean's own regenerative mechanisms to operate. The ocean has been regenerating for billions of years without human assistance. What it needs from us now is not intervention, but restraint. Less fishing pressure, less pollution, less habitat destruction, less carbon emission. The ocean can do the rest, given time and space. Time is the element we cannot manufacture or accelerate beyond natural limits. A starfish arm takes weeks or months to regrow. A coral reef takes decades or centuries to recover from severe damage. A fish population takes years to rebuild after overfishing. An ecosystem takes decades to centuries to return to a mature state after major disturbance. These timescales are set by biology and cannot be rushed. A coral polyp can only divide so fast. A fish can only grow so quickly. A kelp plant can only photosynthesize at rates determined by available light and nutrients. We must accept these timescales, must plan and act with patience, must resist the temptation to expect immediate results. This patience is difficult in a culture that values speed and immediate gratification. But the ocean teaches a different rhythm. It teaches that important processes take time, that complexity emerges gradually, that resilience is built through slow accumulation rather than rapid construction. The starfish does not regrow its arm overnight. The reef does not rebuild in a season. The kelp forest does not recover in a year. These processes unfold according to their own pace, indifferent to human impatience. Watching regeneration requires a particular kind of attention, not the focused intensity of someone waiting for a specific outcome, but the patient awareness of someone observing a process that will unfold regardless of their watching. You can check on a starfish weekly and see little change. You can visit the reef annually and notice gradual increase in coral cover. You can monitor the kelp forest seasonally and observe the slow expansion in previously barren areas. The changes are real but incremental, visible only when viewed across appropriate timescales. This is the rhythm we have been moving through together during this long exploration. Not rushing from fact to fact, but allowing each idea to settle, each image to form, each connection to become clear. We have traveled from the cellular mechanisms of starfish regeneration to the planetary cycles that govern ocean chemistry. We have explored tide pools and coral reefs, kelp forests and seagrass meadows, mangrove coasts and deep-sea vents. We have considered how regeneration works at the level of molecules and cells and organisms and ecosystems. We have acknowledged both the ocean's remarkable capacity for recovery and the very real challenges posed by human impacts. And now, as this journey settles toward its end, we can hold all of these ideas together without needing to resolve them into simple conclusions. The ocean is regenerating and the ocean is threatened. Life is resilient and life is vulnerable. The future is uncertain and the future depends partly on choices being made now. All of these things are true simultaneously. They do not cancel each other out. They exist together, creating a complex reality that requires both hope and action, both appreciation and concern. The starfish remains our anchor through all of this complexity. It is a specific, tangible creature that you could find on a rocky shore, that you could watch with your own eyes, that you could observe regrowing a lost arm if you return to the same spot over weeks or months. It is not an abstraction or a symbol, though we have used it symbolically. It is a living animal, following its biological programming, responding to its environment, surviving or not surviving based on conditions it does not control or understand. Its regeneration is real, measurable, observable, and that reality connects to everything else we have discussed. When you see a starfish with arms of different sizes, you are seeing the result of injury and regeneration. You are seeing cellular processes that began weeks or months ago that involve the activation of specific genes, the production of specific proteins, the migration and division of thousands of cells. You are seeing a capacity that evolved hundreds of millions of years ago and has been maintained because it provides survival advantage. You are seeing a process that depends on environmental conditions, on water quality and temperature, and food availability. You are seeing, in one small creature, a principle that operates throughout the ocean at every scale. This is why we began with the starfish and return to it now. Not because it is the most important organism in the ocean, but because it makes regeneration visible and comprehensible. It offers a way into understanding processes that are otherwise too small to see, too slow to observe, too complex to grasp all at once. The starfish is a teacher, though it does not intend to teach. It simply exists, and in existing, demonstrates principles that apply far beyond itself. As you rest now, or prepare to rest, you can carry with you the image of the starfish on its rock. You can imagine the slow work of regeneration happening in darkness, cells dividing, tissue forming, function gradually returning. You can extend that image outward to include the coral polyp building its skeleton, the kelp plant growing toward light, the seagrass shoot spreading through sediment. You can see these processes as expressions of life's fundamental capacity to repair itself, to persist, to continue. This capacity does not guarantee any particular outcome. It does not mean that every injured starfish will successfully regrow its arm, that every damaged reef will recover, that every degraded ecosystem will return to health. But it means that the possibility exists. It means that given appropriate conditions and sufficient time, regeneration can occur. It means that the future is not predetermined, that there is space for recovery, that actions taken now can influence what happens next. The ocean continues its ancient rhythms as you settle into rest. Tides rise and fall according to the moon's pull. Currents circulate, moving water and nutrients and heat around the planet. Photosynthesis converts sunlight into chemical energy in the surface waters. Organisms eat and are eaten, grow and reproduce and die, their bodies cycling back into the chemical economy of the sea. And throughout all of this, regeneration proceeds in countless small moments. A starfish extending new tissue into a growing arm, a coral polyp dividing to expand its colony, a kelp plant producing spores, a seagrass shoot sending out rhizomes. These processes will continue whether you are aware of them or not. The ocean does not require your attention to function, but perhaps there is value in the awareness itself, in knowing that this vast regenerative capacity exists, that life is constantly repairing itself, that the story is not one of simple decline, but of ongoing interaction between damage and recovery, loss and renewal. Perhaps this knowledge offers a kind of comfort, a sense that we are part of something larger and more enduring than our individual concerns. Your breathing has perhaps slowed as we have moved through these ideas. Your body has perhaps settled more deeply into rest. This is appropriate. There is nothing urgent here, nothing that requires immediate action from you in this moment. The facts we have explored will remain true tomorrow. The starfish will continue its slow regeneration whether you are awake or asleep. The ocean will continue its cycles, indifferent to your state of consciousness. If you are still awake, still listening, there are always more details to explore, more connections to trace, more aspects of regeneration to consider. The ocean is large enough to contain endless stories, endless examples, endless variations on the themes we have touched upon. But there is no requirement to continue. You have traveled far already, from the cellular level to the planetary scale, from individual organisms to entire ecosystems. You have learned about the mechanisms of regeneration, the factors that support or hinder it, the timescales on which it operates, the connections between individual healing and ecosystem recovery. This knowledge is yours now, to carry with you, or to release, to remember or to forget, to act upon or simply to appreciate. The starfish does not ask anything of you. It continues its existence regardless. But perhaps knowing that it can regrow its lost arm, that this capacity exists, that regeneration is woven into the fabric of ocean life, perhaps this offers something useful. A different way of thinking about damage and recovery, a longer perspective on time, a sense of connection to processes that are both ancient and ongoing. The night deepens around you, wherever you are. The ocean continues under its own night, though light and darkness mean different things at different depths. In the shallow waters where starfish live, night brings different predators, different prey, different patterns of activity. In the deep sea, where sunlight never penetrates, the distinction between day and night fades into irrelevance. But everywhere, at all depths, in all zones, the work of life continues. Cells divide, proteins fold, energy flows from one organism to another. And when damage occurs, when injury happens, the ancient mechanisms of regeneration activate, attempting to restore what was lost. This is the final image to rest with. Regeneration as a continuous process, not an exception, but a constant feature of life in the ocean. The starfish regrowing its arm is not performing a miracle. It is doing what starfish have done for hundreds of millions of years, what its ancestors did, what its descendants will do if conditions allow. The ordinariness of this is itself remarkable. Regeneration is so common, so widespread, so fundamental to ocean life that it becomes almost invisible, noticed only when we pause to observe carefully, to ask questions, to investigate the mechanisms beneath the surface. We have paused together for this long exploration. We have observed carefully. We have asked questions about how regeneration works, why it matters, what supports it, what threatens it. And now the exploration can rest, can settle, can become part of the quiet knowledge you carry as you move towards sleep. The ocean continues. The starfish continues. Regeneration continues. And you can rest, knowing that these processes will unfold in their own time, according to their own rhythms, part of the vast patient work of life on this blue planet. If you wake and wish to explore further, there are always more stories waiting, more creatures to meet, more processes to understand, more connections to trace through the living world. But for now, this is enough. The starfish has shown us what we came to see. The ocean has shared its secrets of regeneration and renewal. And you can let these images and ideas settle into the background of your mind, becoming part of the landscape of your understanding, present but not demanding attention, available if needed, otherwise simply resting alongside you. The water moves in its ancient patterns. The cells divide in their ancient rhythms. The starfish extends its tube feet and holds onto its rock. And somewhere, in the darkness of the ocean or the darkness of your room, regeneration continues its slow, patient, persistent work. This is the gift of the starfish. Not just the fact of its regeneration, but the reminder that life contains within itself the capacity to heal, to recover, to continue. Not always, not guaranteed, but possible, present, real. And with that possibility held gently in mind, you can release your attention. You can let the facts and images blur into the soft background of approaching sleep. You can trust that the ocean will continue its work without your observation. You can rest in the knowledge that regeneration is happening now, in countless places, in countless ways, part of the ongoing story of life on Earth. The starfish does not need you to watch. It simply continues. And so can you, continuing into rest, into sleep, into the quiet renewal that your own body performs each night, following its own ancient instructions, regenerating in its own way. The ocean breathes with the tides. You breathe with your own rhythm. Both are forms of continuation, of persistence, of the fundamental refusal of life to simply stop. And in that continuation, in that persistence, there is something worth resting beside. Something steady, something that will still be true when you wake. The starfish on its rock, the ocean in its vastness, regeneration in its patient work, all continuing, all present, all real. Rest now, if you are ready. The stories will be here when you return. The ocean will still be regenerating. The starfish will still be slowly, steadily, regrowing what was lost. And you will still be part of this world where damage and healing exist together, where loss and renewal follow each other, where life continues its ancient work of persistence and transformation. Rest with that knowledge. Rest in that continuity. Rest